The narrow pass fills with dust and the deafening roar of men who know they cannot retreat. Surrounded, outnumbered, and already marked for death, the Spartan line has broken. There's no clean wall of shields anymore, just a shrinking group of warriors, backs almost touching, surrounded on all sides. One Spartan soldier lets out a war cry and surges forward, driving his spear into a Persian's armored torso. The over 8-foot shaft punches through scale and flesh with a brutal crunch, the iron tip bursting out a full foot behind the man's back. The Persian grabs the spear's blood-slick shaft, and his eyes go wide as he lets out a guttural cry that is swallowed up by the thunder of battle. As the Spartan wrenches his spear free of the soldier, he feels the iron head snap off inside the Persian's body, its point lodged somewhere deep in his ribs. This is the Battle of Thermopylae, the last stand of the Spartans. And even though this hoplite knows he won't live to see the end of this day, his laws demand a high price for his soul, and he's determined to send as many of the Achaemenid invaders as he can to the underworld before he too exits this plane. The Spartan clutches his broken spear and doesn't even need to think about what to do next. A lifetime of training has prepared him as he flips the spear over and spins, thrusting the bronze spike on the other end into the exposed neck of the soldier who was attempting to strike him while his back was turned. The Persian drops his short sword and falls to his hands and knees, clutching at his throat as blood begins to pour out of his opened artery. A loud scream pierces the air as blood runs down and over the ground, mixing with the straw scattered across the floor. The laboring Spartan woman who cries out in pain is surrounded by her midwives, and they in turn are attended by multiple helot slaves as a solitary figure watches from the doorway of his home, his oikos. The child's first cries ring out into the night as the midwives take the newborn and rush him to a basin. Water is for the weak, and the child is plunged into pungent, undiluted red wine so that his skin will be tempered and made tough like leather. He'll need to be tough if he's going to make it in this life. The soldier steps into the room, and the midwife hands him the child, dripping and smelling of vinegar. He looks down at his son, not so much like a proud new father, but like a foreman inspecting a tool. He doesn't say a word. He simply wraps the child in a coarse cloak and turns toward the door. He has a long walk ahead of him through the unlit streets of Sparta to the Leschi, the meeting place of the elders, and it is they who will decide the fate of his son. The father walks through a simple gathering hall dimly lit by braziers. Waiting for him on wooden benches are 28 men, all over the age of 60, as well as the 2 kings of Sparta. But this isn't the first time the father has come to the Leschi. When a child is born here, the group of men known as the Gerousia inspect the child to determine if it is worthy of being brought up as a Spartan. The slightest hint of weakness may be used as an excuse to reject the child. Loose joints, a curved spine, too much crying, any sign at all that it won't grow up to be a strong member of their warrior society. And should the elders turn their back on the child, the father has no further say in the matter. He must take his newborn child to the Apothete, the place of rejection, a chasm at the foot of Mount Taygetus, and leave it to the wilderness. The father can only wait as the elders look over his second son. His eyes are wide and vibrant, his limbs are thick, sturdy, and still stained a deep red from the wine bath. And most importantly, he doesn't cry. One of the 2 kings of Sparta passes the child back to his father and nods. The child will become a Spartan and inherit all the benefits that come with that status. He'll be granted a plot of land in the fertile valleys of Messenia, but he'll never have to plow it because he'll be given slaves who will do that for him. All he has to do to earn this honor is survive the grueling and arduous path to adulthood, a lifetime of training and sacrifice so that one day he can become part of the human wall that protects their way of life. Training for a Spartan soldier essentially began at birth. Before he could even speak, his mother would tell him stories about the heroes who had fought and died valiantly in battle. He'd be left alone in pitch-black rooms to learn not to fear the dark. When he fell, his mother wouldn't rush over to comfort him. It was up to him to learn to deal with the pain, no matter how great. A Spartan son grows up without a father. His own, after all, is a member of the same warrior class that the boy aspires to one day join, and that means living at the barracks. The only time he sees the hoplite who sired him is when he's able to sneak away from the barracks in the middle of the night to visit the boy's mother, and he's often gone again before daybreak. But as the boy's 7th birthday approaches, another man comes to the oikos, and this one comes in the full light of day. The boy's hair has grown long, never once cut since he was born, and his young body is already growing strong from the heavy chores and physical games he spends every day at. He's in the middle of splitting wood when his mother calls him into the house. Inside waiting for him is the Paidonomos, a title that roughly translates to the boy herder. He's come to collect the child because he is old enough to enter the next phase of his life. It's time for him to begin his training. The mother doesn't cry or plead with the Paidonomos to let her have more time with her child. As a woman of Sparta, this is her greatest honor. She gives her only son to the man without a hug or a kiss goodbye, but she does offer him some parting words. Placing her hand on his shoulder, she tells him that he must come back with your shield or on it. And the boy knows all too well from the stories she has told him his entire life that she means this quite literally. He must return from the field of battle either as a victor or a corpse. Fleeing is never an option. And with that, the man leads him away from the only home he's ever known. For all intents and purposes, the boy's childhood is over. It's time for him to enter the Agoge. The Agoge, which translates to the leading or the guidance, was akin to a boarding school for future Spartan soldiers, a sprawling state-run training regime that took place in the fields, the gymnasiums, and the barracks surrounding the city. This is where Sparta forged its elite warriors, and that process began from the moment one arrived. The first step was stripping away all identity. The boy's hair is shaved, and his childhood clothes are taken away, replaced by a simple tunic. From now on, the boy is part of an agella, a herd, a pack of boys looked over by a young man who had recently completed his own training, known as an iron. The iron carries a whip, and if a boy is slow, cries, or fails a task, the iron lashes him. The iron has no choice, since he's also being closely watched. If the iron is too lenient, or if his herd of boys is seen as soft, the iron himself is whipped. Their other tool to harden the boys: hunger. Even though Sparta was wealthy, with plenty of food from their slave-tended farms, they knew that starvation could be the ultimate training motivator. The boy, now 10, crouches against the wall of a farmhouse. He's barely eaten in days, and the sight of salted pork through the window makes his mouth water. He creeps closer to the window on his bare, calloused feet and peers through the opening. He watches the helot farmer inside turn away to tend to the fire and knows that this is his chance. In one lightning-quick motion, he vaults through the window, grabs the pork off the table, and is back through and outside again, all without making a single sound. He can't wait any longer, and there, sitting against the farmhouse wall in the light of the moon, he begins tearing into the salted pork with his teeth. But as he swallows his first bite, a dark shadow falls upon him. The helot farmer enters the barracks and tosses the boy onto the ground at the feet of his iron. The boy tries, but he's unable to hide the fear on his face. He knows he's facing a terrible punishment that night, not for stealing, but for getting caught. And the punishment will be extra severe due to the fear he displayed. In the future, he must accept his fate with a sterner face. At the age of 12, the Spartan state decided it would no longer go easy on the boys. His tunic is taken away and replaced by a tribon, a single coarse woolen cloak that will be his only protection from both heat and cold. It's also time for him to make his own bed. The boy is sent to the banks of the Eurotas River, where sharp, jagged reeds grow thick in the mud. The boys aren't allowed any tools, so he must tear the needle-like reeds out of the ground with his bare hands. By the time the sun sets, his hands are a mess of deep cuts filled with river silt. He takes the reeds back to the barracks and lashes them into a bed. The sharp reeds will ensure he never sleeps too soundly, since a soldier who sleeps too well is a soldier who can be surprised. At this age, meals become just as character-building as his sleep. Gone are the relatively good, if unfilling, meals of his younger days, and along with his new cloak and his bed of reeds, the boy is introduced to the melos zomos, or black broth, a concoction of boiled pig's blood, salt, and vinegar. There's a legend that says a traveler from Italy once tasted it and remarked, "Now I know why the Spartans do not fear death. To die is better than to eat this. To a Spartan warrior, though, food was just one more luxury that one should not allow oneself to become a slave to. If you can live on black broth, you are truly free. Every day of the boy's life is devoted to becoming a better warrior, whether that be through physically hardening his body or by developing the skills needed to wage war. Today, he is practicing that skill by dancing. The boy and his Agella are performing the Pyrrhic dances, military drills that are set to a beat. He moves in sync with the other boys as their iron hits a drum to keep the rhythm. The boys step one direction, then another in perfect time, crying out and thrusting their wooden practice spears forward together in unison. They are learning to fight as a single, cohesive unit, and soon the phalanx begins to take shape. A living shield and spear wall that acts as an ancient version of an armored assault vehicle. The boy has long forgotten what it was like to be a relatively carefree youth at his oikos. He's becoming a hardened warrior of Sparta. By the age of 18, the boy has survived 11 years of the Agoge, and soon he will no longer be considered a boy at all in the eyes of the state. But before he can take his place among the warriors of Sparta, he must pass one final test. He moves through the olive grove as the setting sun turns the sky blood red, his training allowing him to pass between the trees without a sound. From the edge of the field, he watches a Helot farmer and his son finishing their work. The years of back-breaking labor have left the father bent and brittle, but the son has grown tall and strong. He laughs as he lifts a heavy sack of grain from his father's shoulders and carries it with ease. To his family, that strength is a blessing. But to Sparta, it is something very different. It's a threat. Spartans weren't the majority population in their own society. They were vastly outnumbered by the Helots they had enslaved, by possibly as much as 20 to 1. But while the Spartans didn't fear being outmatched, they knew the value of strength, and strength among the enslaved was something the state couldn't tolerate. This was the Cryptia, a sacred and bloody rite for select Spartan soldiers to be. Every year, the ephors, the 5 most powerful magistrates in Sparta, formally declared war on the Helot population. It granted chosen boys of the Agoge the authority to kill in the name of the state, and legally, there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The blade vanishes as quickly as it appeared, and its wielder is already gone, swallowed by the trees of the olive grove. The father rushes forward, catching his son as his legs give out. He presses his hands against the wound, whispering his name, but the life is already draining from the young man's eyes. All he can do is hold his eldest son as he dies in his arms. In the eyes of the Spartan state, this was a necessary legal action, a way to cull the herd of the Helots, eliminating their strongest before they had the chance to lead an uprising against their masters. And the Spartan boys who successfully completed the Cryptia by killing a prime-aged Helot could look forward to spending the next 2 years of their life as an iron, watching over their own flock of new boys, until at the age of 20, they finally had the chance they had been waiting their entire life for. The young man, after 13 years of life in the Agoge, is ready to enter the mess hall, the Syssitia. This is where the fully minted soldiers of Sparta dine, but it is also where they undertook one of their most important duties, voting on whether to admit new members to their ranks. Each man in the Syssitia would take a piece of dough. If they approved of the candidate, they dropped it into a bowl as is, but if they had even a single doubt, if they thought the boy was a coward, a loudmouth, or just didn't have the Spartan spirit, they would squeeze that ball flat with their thumb. That was a black ball. The young man stands in the darkness outside the hall, waiting, as the bowl is passed from soldier to soldier inside. It reaches the final one, the veteran hoplite who has watched the young man since he took his first breath in the oikos 20 years before, who drops in his solid, round ball. The bowl is brought back out to the ephors. They reach in, sifting through the white balls of dough. Every single one is round. With a nod from the veteran, the young man is invited inside. He is no longer a part of the herd, but a Spartiate. He is given a seat at the table and finally sits with his fellow warriors to celebrate with a meal of black broth. But that seat comes with a price. He must now provide his monthly quota of barley, wine, cheese, and figs from his own estate. If he ever fails to pay, he loses his status. And of course, his most important job, he must protect the nation of Sparta at all costs. no matter how big the threat. And over the next 10 years, that threat would grow from a distant rumor into an existential nightmare. While he was growing from a boy in the Agoge to a full Spartan warrior, the Persian Empire was expanding across the ancient world. And in 490 BC, the great King Darius tried to add Greece to his collection. He landed at Marathon expecting the Athenians to crumble, but instead, the Greeks did the impossible. They broke the Persian line and sent the Invincibles screaming back to their ships. It was a humiliation the Persians would never forget. Darius is now dead, but his son, Xerxes, has inherited his father's grudge, and he's marched one of the largest armies the ancient world had ever seen out of Asia and into Europe in order to take what his father could not. As the Persian tide rolls south, city after city sees the dust clouds on the horizon and offers up earth and water, the ancient tokens of submission. Macedonia falls, then Thessaly surrenders. Soon, all that's left is the Peloponnese, anchored by the iron-willed city of Sparta. Xerxes expects them to submit just as the others had before, but he hasn't met men like these before. Men who spent their entire lives training for this exact moment when they would have to face sure death and laugh in its face. So when Xerxes sends his messengers ahead, promising that his arrows will be so numerous they will blot out the sun, he expects the Greeks to tremble. But instead, the Spartans, true to their training, give the most laconic response in human history. Then we shall fight in the shade. But just as the Persian juggernaut reaches the doorstep of Sparta, the warrior state is paralyzed by its own laws and traditions. It is the time of the Carneia, a sacred festival dedicated to Apollo, and the priests have made it clear the gods demand peace. Even though they will almost certainly be destroyed if they sit and do nothing, to march the full Spartan army now would be a sacrilege, and the punishment one will face for crime against the gods is worse than anything that can happen on Earth. In any other city, a king would simply ignore the priests and march, but in Sparta, the law is everything. So one of the two kings of Sparta, Leonidas, finds a loophole. He won't march an army, he will lead a bodyguard. He selects 300 men for a mission he claims is merely a reconnaissance. The Spartan warriors know the truth, though, which is why Leonidas only chooses men for his bodyguard who have living sons. He knows that the men will likely never return, and by choosing fathers, he ensures that man's bloodline will remain to continue serving Sparta. The Spartan is now 30 years old, the absolute prime of a warrior's life. After decades of training, he now wears the full panoply, the heavy bronze breastplate, the greaves that protect his shins, and the iconic Corinthian helmet that turns his face into a terrifying, expressionless mask of metal. As the small band of warriors marches through the gates of Sparta with Leonidas, the citizens gather in silence. There's no cheering, only the heavy weight of what's to come. The Spartan warrior sees his own wife standing in the crowd, holding their young son. Nearby stands his mother. She's much older now, and at her side is the Spartan's father, watching him with the same intense stare he had as he watched the boy enter this world 30 years before. The Spartan warrior doesn't stop or break rank. He only offers a single, sharp nod in the direction of his family. As he marches past with the 299 other Spartans, his mother's voice cries out the same words he heard when he was taken to the Agoge. "Come back with your shield, or on it." The Spartans referred to this spot as the Hot Gates because of the sulfur springs that bubble up from the ground, and the geography here is a Spartan's dream. To the left, the jagged, unclimbable cliffs of the Calidromus Mountains. To the right, the churning waters of the Malian Gulf. In between was a strip of land so narrow that only a single wagon can pass at a time. This is where the Spartans will force Xerxes' army to confront them, with the pass limiting how many of his massive army can face them at once. Joined by roughly 7,000 allies from across Greece, including Thespians, Thebans, and Phocians, the small army begins its first task, rebuilding the old crumbling wall built by the local Phocians generations ago. The digging of sharp reeds for a bed, the manual labor of the Agoge, it was all for this, to prepare the Spartan warrior to be able to work even when others needed rest, so that they can turn the ruin into a choke point, a gate across the pass that they intend to close with their own bodies. As they finish the wall, the horizon begins to change. A forest of dust rises from the north, of the feet of hundreds of thousands of marching men. Then the Malian Gulf begins to fill, with hundreds, then thousands of Persian ships. Xerxes, the king of kings, has arrived with the pomp and circumstance of a living god. Seeing the small band of Greeks waiting for him and the hastily built wall, Xerxes decides to sit on his throne and wait. He expects the Greeks to run, to hide, to fall to their knees and beg for his mercy, but they do none of those. When he sends a horseman to scout their camp, he returns to tell the king that the Spartans are outside the wall, stripped to the waist, exercising and combing their long hair. Xerxes can only laugh, and turns to Demaratus, an exiled Spartan king now in his service, mocking these vain women. But Demaratus doesn't laugh. He warns the great king that when a Spartan combs his hair, he is preparing to die, and he is preparing to take as many of your men with him as possible. On the 5th day, the wait is over. Xerxes loses his patience and unleashes his first wave. The Spartan warrior stands in the front rank, his 70-pound bronze shield, his aspis, overlapping with the man to his left. The difference in equipment is catastrophic for the Persians. The invaders carry wicker shields and wear quilted linen, and their spears are short, meant for the open plains of Asia. The Spartans are encased in bronze, and their 8-foot-long spears are tipped with iron. The Persians slam into the shield wall, and their wicker shields shatter against Spartan bronze. They stab, but their short spears can't reach the Spartan flesh inside the phalanx. The Spartans have no such limitation, and the battle becomes a harvest as they reap and sow Persian lives, stabbing and slashing until blood pools around their feet. The front rank stabs until their arms burn, then they peel back and another line steps through, fresh shields forward, fresh spears out, an endless, disciplined dance of murder. Xerxes keeps sending men into the pass, an unending tide pressing forward one after another, with each fallen man replaced before he's even dead, the next one stepping over his dying body in a rush to become the next victim of a Spartan spear. The phalanx appears completely impenetrable, but then the Spartan line gives way and breaks, the warriors suddenly turning and running in panic. The Persians, sensing victory, break their own formation to chase them, cheering in joy that the day might finally be won. But then the Spartans stop and pivot 180 degrees in perfect unison at an even narrower point in the gap. Their shields overlap once again into an armored wall, and their spears thrust out between them. The press from the rear keeps shoving fresh bodies into the trap, men screaming, slipping, scrambling over their own fallen, only to be pinned in place by the crush. The narrow pass becomes a slaughterhouse. On the 6th day, Xerxes, now frustrated and embarrassed, sends in his own elite warriors, the Immortals. 10,000 warriors who fight in silver and gold finery. They were called the Immortals because their ranks were always immediately replenished, giving the impression that it was an army that could never die. But as they hit the Spartan line, the truth was revealed that they bleed, scream, and die, just like the Persians from the day before. The dead so-called Immortals continue to pile up, just as the others had before them, and by sunset, the Persians are forced to climb over piles of their own dead just to reach the Spartan line. Another day passes with Xerxes' army unable to break the Spartans. It's another day of daring to hope that they might even survive to return to their homes, the farms, and their families. But then, in the dark of night, a time when Spartan warriors are supposed to be their most dangerous, an enemy finally manages to get the best of them. A local Greek named Ephialtes, hoping for Persian gold, reveals to Xerxes the existence of the Anopeia Path, a goat track that leads over the mountains and behind the Greek position. Under the cover of night, the hidden path allows the Immortals to snake around the heights and behind the wall of the 300 Spartans. By morning, news has reached the Spartans that they are encircled. Leonidas knows the end has come. He orders the other Greek allies to retreat so they can fight another day. But he remains, and with him stay 700 Thespians, 400 Thebans, and the 300 Spartans. All of the warriors know that to stay is a death sentence, but there is never even a question of fleeing. They've been preparing for this moment since they were born. From the moment they were washed in the basin of wine, to the years in the Agoge, every hard night, every lash, was a down payment on this final, bloody debt. Because for a Spartan, life wasn't measured by the years lived, but by the glory of the ending. Knowing they are surrounded, the Spartans do the one thing the Persians never expected. they march out past their wall and into the widest part of the pass and invite the Persians to attack. There's no longer any thought given to survival. The Spartans only want to ensure the highest cost for their souls. Early in the day, King Leonidas falls, his armor pierced by a dozen Persian shafts. 4 times the Persians charged to claim the trophy of the fallen king, and 4 times the Spartans pushed them away, beating back the army of Xerxes until their shields are battered and their spears broken. The Spartan warrior, one of the few still standing, tosses his own headless spear to the ground and draws his xiphos, his short sword, and continues to add to his number killed until his bronze blade shatters against a Persian helmet. He is left with nothing but his bare hands, teeth, and nail, but still he fights. The Persians, terrified to get within arm's reach of the remaining monsters, back away, realizing they won't break these men in a hand-to-hand fight. And so Xerxes gives the order. A rain of thousands of arrows descends, truly blotting out the sun. The Spartan warrior doesn't flinch or try to hide. He stands his ground, finally finding the shade he was promised. The Battle of Thermopylae is over. Xerxes has won, and 300 Spartans lie dead in the bloody-soaked mud of the Hot Gates. But even as Xerxes stands atop the mound of Greek corpses, he'll soon realize that while he has won the battle, he has lost the war. His army continues south, reaching a deserted Athens where they burn its temples to the ground, but the victory is hollow. The Spartan sacrifice has bought enough time for the Greeks to take to the sea. At the naval battle of Salamis, the Athenian fleet lures the Persian navy into a trap and crushes the Persians. Xerxes flees back to Asia in fear, leaving his general, Mardonius, to finish a job that has suddenly become impossible. The final crushing blow comes 1 year later at the Battle of Plataea. This time, it isn't just 300 men holding a gate. It is the full, terrible weight of the Spartan war machine. Thousands of Spartiates finally land in the open sun, locked shield to shield, ready to break an empire. Today, the Hot Gates look different. The sea has receded miles away, and the narrow pass is now a wide plain. But in the center of the site stands a simple, weathered stone monument that marks the spot where the Spartan brothers made their stand, with the words, "Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie."
The sword is pointed at the young man's throat, and yet he's smiling. Not nervous, not panicking, calm, the picture of serenity. But why? That's the question plaguing the minds of the Sicilian pirates who've just boarded a small boat sailing across the Aegean Sea. It's 75 BCE, and out here, the pirates, brutal men, no stranger to bloodshed, rule the waves. Anyone who fights back gets their throat slit, then dumped into the cold, indifferent sea. The pirates tear through the ship, stripping the cabin and the hold of anything valuable. Then it's time for the next problem. What to do with the survivors? Most are unremarkable, forgettable. But not him. The young man shows no fear. If anything, he looks bored. But there's something about him. He carries himself with a noble bearing. It's impossible to ignore, and men like that are worth money.
"Think we'd get as many as 20 talents for this little lout?"
One of the pirates says aloud. That just makes the boy laugh.
20? A bargain. Do you wish to disrespect me? Ask for 50 at least, or you'll hurt my feelings.
Never in all their years at sea had they seen anything like this. A kidnapping victim requests a raise of his ransom, but a pirate never turns down a good payday, so the deal is struck. The rest of the people on board are sent back to the mainland to come up with the money. What the pirates don't realize is that they've just signed their own death warrants. They drag the boy onto their craft and push off, telling him that if he tries to escape, they'll run him through. That doesn't seem to bother him either. In fact, he criticizes them for interrupting his trip to Rhodes, where he planned to study oration. Not that the pirates thought he needed lessons. The boy could talk. And that's not all. He gives speeches and performs poetry. If any of them fail to clap, he calls them an illiterate fool. He treats them like servants, ordering them around and telling them to be quiet when he wants to sleep. He takes part in their drinking and games and jokes like he's a member of the crew. Some of the pirates even find him a little charming. except when he says,
You know, when my men capture you, I'm gonna have you crucified.
They all try to laugh. The kid has a sick sense of humor. At this point, I should probably mention the young man's name. Julius Caesar. And Caesar, for all his faults, is a man who keeps his promises. Not long after his release and the capture of the pirates, he sat back and watched with a smile on his face. His men were ruthless. Throats were slit, nails hammered into hands and feet, crucifixes raised, and they were hanged, exposing their bruised and beaten bodies to the elements, all for the crime of inconveniencing Caesar. Some say revenge is a dish best served cold, but as we take our forward march from ancient times to the modern day, you'll soon discover that it's actually a dish best served with maximum brutality. And what Caesar did to those unlucky pirates was little more than an appetizer. Back in 1868, when young Frank Eaton was only 8 years old, his father, an avowed abolitionist, was killed by 6 gunmen. And these weren't just Old West bandits. They were self-appointed regulators, ex-members of Confederate militia groups looking to soothe the shame of a lost war through vigilante murders. Eaton's dad was just one more victim of their racially motivated killing spree. Not long after his father's murder, a friend of his father took young Frank by the shoulders and said,
My boy, may an old man's curse rest upon you, if you do not try to avenge your father.
That father's friend then introduced him into the world of gunplay. It wasn't long before he was headed off to Fort Gibson to polish his skills, where he was said to be competing at the level of the fort's best marksman at 15 years old. This got him the iconic nickname Pistol Pete. In the decade and change that followed, he hunted the 5 surviving men who killed his father and expertly gunned them down. Deciding he had a knack for all this, he decided to become a sheriff and live to the ripe old age of 97. The Indian freedom fighter Udham Singh had a hard childhood, losing most of his family at a young age before being admitted to an orphanage. Eventually, he joined the armed forces of the British Empire just in time for World War I, hoping that it'd help lift him out of poverty. Instead, all it did was radicalize him against the British, seeing them as tyrannical rulers who cared little for the lives of their subjects in Southeast Asia. It prepared him for a life of activism. He never once imagined it'd someday lead to him becoming an assassin. In 1919, he was among the 10,000 people protesting the Rowlatt Acts, a law that let the British try political cases without a jury. Udham was handing out water to the crowd when Reginald Dyer, a British officer working crowd control at the protest, ordered his troops to cordon off the area and massacre everyone inside. Udham only barely escaped that hell of blood and bullets with his life when he heard the British Lieutenant Governor of Punjab, Michael O'Dwyer, emphatically endorse the mass killing. He knew what had to be done. But to get access to the man, he'd need to be extremely patient. Udham would live a global life of revolution, building support for causes against the interests of the oppressive and cruel British Raj. He spent some time in prison for sedition, during which Reginald Dyer, the man who'd ordered the massacre on the ground, died of natural causes. But O'Dwyer was still out there, and when Udham was released from prison, he didn't intend to let him get away with what he did. On March 13, 1940, moments after Michael O'Dwyer gave a speech in London, Udham approached and gunned him down with a concealed pistol. It took 21 years and cost Udham his life when he was subsequently tried and executed for the murder. But he'd avenged the massacre that had changed his life forever. He's widely seen as a hero across India today. What's worse than a single assassin? How about an entire town coming for you? On July 10, 1981, Ken Rex McElroy finished his drink at a bar in Skidmore, Missouri. He bought a 6-pack of beer and headed to his truck outside, where his wife, Trina, was waiting in the passenger seat. It wasn't a cold and lonely night. In fact, there was a crowd of 46 locals out there, all in plain view of the truck. Suddenly, gunfire broke out. Rounds from multiple weapons peppered the truck, and 2 bullets, each a different caliber, pierced the windshield, fatally striking Ken and spraying Trina with his blood. And despite all those witnesses, not a single person stepped forward to identify a shooter. Over 40 years later, there still hasn't been a single person charged with Ken's murder. Naturally, you're probably wondering how this was possible. Did the killer figure out how to turn invisible before firing a gun in each hand like a hero in a John Woo movie? It's actually much simpler than that. Ken McElroy was a man that the entire town of Skidmore, Missouri wanted dead, and not a single person would ever want to punish the people who killed him. He was known locally as the town bully, and he had a rap sheet that had backed that reputation up. He'd been indicted 21 times for various crimes, from multiple offenses of a sexual nature to physical assault, arson, animal cruelty, burglary, and even cattle rustling. But none of it stuck, except the crime that would set his death in motion: the assault of a beloved 70-year-old grocer, whom Ken threatened and non-fatally shot with a shotgun. When Ken's hearing was delayed, the rest of the town convened to discuss how they could protect themselves from his wrath. Whether the shooting of Ken McElroy was planned there or was some mutual crime of passion, we'll never know. What we do know is that you could count the people who'd mourn the man on one hand and still have plenty of fingers left over. It would take a true monster to be even more hated than a man like Ken McElroy, but Aku Yadav certainly tried to take the title. Short of war crimes and genocide, it's easier to list the crimes that Aku didn't commit than the ones he did. A serial offender whose treatment, especially against women, is enough to make someone physically sick. He always managed to skirt consequences thanks to his other vocation, a successful gangster running bribery and extortion rackets, with the local police seemingly in his pocket. He was also, technically, a serial killer, responsible for at least 3 murders. Much like Ken McElroy, Aku was a monster and a bully. And also much like Ken McElroy, he was about to realize that there's only so far that you can push people before they push back. In 2004, Aku's luck ran out when a woman named Usha Narayane fought back against Aku and his gang's attempts at intimidation. Her courage inspired others to rise up. Soon, an angry mob was throwing burning torches at Aku's house until it lay in a smoldering wreck. He was so terrified that he fled to the police to be arrested for his own protection, but that plan didn't exactly pan out either. A confident Aku swaggered into the Nagpur district court, so certain that his institutional power would protect him. He'd gotten away with it every time before, so why not now? But as he gloated to the crowd about how untouchable he was, the mood changed. Hundreds of women were parading through the streets, and now they were flooding into the courtroom. But their hands weren't full of protest signs and megaphones. They were holding knives, stones, and chili powder. The latter two were soon raining down on the cops guarding Aku, and they soon fled, leaving the monstrous man undefended. The women descended on him as he cowered, getting stones and chili powder thrown into his eyes. And in a pleasing sense of circularity for this video, they gave him the same treatment the mob of senators gave Julius Caesar. Except this time, in addition to stabbing him 70 times, they also took his manhood. His last words were, "Forgive me, I won't do it again," as he was butchered. And you know, he was right. Aku Yadav died 15 minutes later on the cold, blood-splattered marble of the courtroom. Of his 200 female killers, 21 were arrested. All claimed responsibility in the streets, but pleaded not guilty in court. And due to a lack of witnesses, all were acquitted. Few rulers have been stranger or more terrifying than King Pedro of Portugal, whose love affair cut a bloody streak across the 14th century. Our tale of revenge begins in the Villa of Tears, a Portuguese mansion, in 1355. A woman waits for the return of her husband, taking care of their 3 children, when a group of masked men wielding swords stormed into the building. She begged for her life and the life of her children. She said that her husband was the prince, a powerful man who could pay them if their lives were spared. One of the assassins laughed and told her that her husband was precisely the reason that she needed to die. They stabbed and hacked until she was no more and fled into the night. The woman they'd just murdered was Inez de Castro, wife of Prince Pedro, but that hadn't always been the case. She had once been the lady-in-waiting for Pedro's former wife, Constanza of Castile, but she and Pedro had fallen in love and begun an affair. When Constanza died of natural causes, Pedro wanted to marry Inez and sought the approval of his father, the king. The thought of this disgusted his father. Inez had been born to a minor noble family from Spain, and he feared this would lead to an outsized Spanish influence on the royal Portuguese court. But the heart wants what the heart wants. Even when his father banished her, Pedro continued his affair. Eventually, with fears of it throwing off the entire royal line, Pedro's own father employed the assassins who murdered Inez. Pedro was heartbroken, but that pain soon became rage. When his father died 2 years later in 1357, he assumed the throne. His first act was to track down the assassins that had been involved in the plot to kill Inez. He found 2 of them and had them beaten and tortured, but since they had essentially ripped out his heart, he decided to return the favor. While King Pedro watched, his executioners physically forced their hands into the bodies of the assassins and tore out their still-beating hearts. Committing the world's most on-theme revenge still wasn't enough. King Pedro continued to be the world's most twisted romantic after that. When he was crowned, he ordered that Inez's corpse be dug up and clothed in royal finery. He made her his true queen, even in death, securing his heir's legitimacy. All the noblemen of his court were made to kiss her decayed hand, as was custom in coronations of the time. 250 years earlier, in the aftermath of the Battle of Claydon, 1014, the valley between the towering Belasica and Ograzden mountains ran red. Blood soaked the earth. Both sides have experienced terrible suffering and loss, but one is far worse off. The Bulgars of Bulgaria were crushed beneath the unstoppable force of the Byzantine army, commanded by the mighty Emperor Basil II. It's the end of a bloody, protracted feud between Basil and the Bulgar leader, Tsar Samuel. Basil strode through the blood and filth as his men collected the survivors as prisoners. After this battle, his nickname will forever be the Bulgar Slayer. But it isn't the slain soldiers that will give him a notorious place in history, it's what he does to the survivors. You see, this was the decisive point in a truly bitter war, one that had killed one of Basil's favorite military commanders. Basil didn't want to vanquish, but to drive and humiliate his opponents. And he had just the way to do it. He had the remaining soldiers, by some counts as many as 15,000 Bulgars, split into groups of 100. 99 of each group of 100 soldiers, he ordered his men to gouge out their eyes with red-hot pokers, rendering them blind. The 100th soldier of each contingent would have only one eye taken, so that they could lead their blinded compatriots back to the capital city for display to Tsar Samuel. This revenge turned out to be twofold, and perhaps one of the most successful pieces of psychological warfare in military history. When the mutilated remains of his army returned to his palace, Samuel was reportedly so horrified by what he saw that he had a heart attack and died 2 days later. While he's seen as a Greek national hero, Basil II is despised by Bulgarians to this day. Maria Oktyabrskaya's own brutal revenge quest unfolded in the 1940s. At first, when World War II plunged the world into chaos, Maria wasn't a soldier, just the wife of one. But that didn't mean she didn't have the skills for warfare. After marrying then-military cadet Ilya Fedotovich Ryadnenko in 1925, she trained in all the reserve force skills, from marksmanship to driving military vehicles. Little did she know how valuable all that knowledge would be in getting her brutal revenge. In 1941, she was forcibly evacuated when the Nazis began pressing eastward, separated from her husband, who was now fighting on the front lines. She wouldn't learn that he'd died in the Battle of Kiev until 1943, and then she had nothing to lose. She was in her late 30s, suffering from spinal tuberculosis that stopped her from ever enlisting through official channels, but she worked hard, sold all of her material possessions, cobbled together 50,000 rubles, and donated them to the army to build a T-34 tank. She then sent a letter to Joseph Stalin himself, requesting permission to drive the tank to kill fascist dogs on behalf of her country in a tank that she would call Fighting Girlfriend. Against all odds, the State Defense Committee agreed. Maria took to the battlefield in Fighting Girlfriend, sharing the tank's cabin with Commander Pyotr Chebotko, gunner Gennady Yasko, and radio operator Mikhail Galkin. Not only did many of the Nazi soldiers who killed her husband die under her tank, she also showed bravery by leaving it to make emergency repairs under heavy fire on more than one occasion. She wrote a letter to her sister at some point during all this, which read in part, "I've had my baptism by fire. I beat them. Sometimes I'm so angry I can't even breathe." Her bravery and devil-may-care attitude sadly led to her death in 1944, after another one of her daring mid-battle tank repairs. She was hit by shell fragments and fell into a coma, never to wake again. But she spilled a lot more blood from the Nazis than they ever spilled from her. Over 1,000 years earlier, Prince Ihor of Kiev has just made the worst decision of his life. As ruler of the Rus, he sees it as his right to collect tribute from the many tribes and factions under him, including the Slavic Drevlians, whom they'd recently bested in a bloody war. But his greed has gotten the better of him. He's returned to their territory for the second time in a month to extort them. This time, he has an arrogantly small group of soldiers to back him up. He and his puny warband are quickly overwhelmed by the Drevlian forces on their home territory. The prince can only watch in horror as they hack his men to death, but he can't help but wonder why he's not getting the same treatment. Maybe, like Caesar, they plan to ransom him for the riches he'd spent years extorting them for. But no, he's not that lucky. First, they beat him senseless. Then they drag him out to a clearing of birch trees where more of the Drevlian soldiers are waiting. They do something strange, bending over two of the largest birches and holding them down in place. Then, they begin tying his ankles to the tips of each birch tree. It's at that moment Prince Ihor realizes what's going to happen to him. He cries and begs, as any sane person would. He tells them of his beloved wife Olga and his infant son who would suffer for his absence. But the Drevlians don't care. After all, it's not like he'd ever shown the same sympathy to them. When the ropes are firmly in place, the several men let go of the birch trees they've been holding down, causing them to whip up and pull Ihor's ankles in two different directions. And just like that, Ihor is half the man he used to be. But this is not the story of the Drevlians' revenge on Ihor. Oh no. It's about what his widow Olga did to the Drevlians in response. Grand Princess Olga of Kiev doesn't take the death of her husband lightly. As the regent ruler of the kingdom following his demise, she immediately begins plotting far stickier ends for everyone that took her beloved Ihor from her and left her child without a father. Until he was old enough to rule, it would be her job to see that justice was done. And the Drevlians gave her a fantastic opportunity. Not long after ripping her husband in half, they sent a delegation to recommend that Olga marry the Drevlian prince to unite their kingdoms. She sent back a response that said, in part, "Your proposal is pleasing to me. Indeed, my husband cannot rise again from the dead, but I desire to honor you tomorrow in the presence of my people." And honor them she does. When the Drevlian boats arrive, the Rus people lift them from the ground and parade them through the streets like a grand celebration, until they see the deep trench her men have dug on the edge of town. When they reach it, the Drevlian men are thrown inside and buried alive. The last words they ever hear are Olga saying,
Do you find the honor to your taste?
And Olga still has plenty of honor to dispense. While the last contingent of Drevlians was still suffocating under hundreds of pounds of hard-packed dirt, she penned a letter to Prince Mal, the leader who sought her hand. She told him to send his best men for her to throw them a lavish dinner. Prince Mal was so excited that his offer had seemingly been accepted, he didn't even stop to consider how much of a red flag this was. When the prince's most distinguished underlings arrived, they were tired and filthy from the long trip. Soup was to be on the menu tonight, but first, the Grand Princess offered the men the chance to relax in their luxury bathhouse, with a tub prepared for each of them. Once they were all inside, Olga's men locked and barricaded the doors and set the place alight. Still, Olga didn't believe that her husband's blood debt had been adequately repaid. She advanced on Drevlian territory before news of either of the slaughters could reach Prince Mal. She asked him and his men to pull together a lavish funeral host in honor of Ihor, so she could properly move on before marrying the Drevlian prince. Mead was drawn from all across the Drevlian kingdom to facilitate such a feast. It was ready by the time Grand Princess Olga arrived, her banners fluttering in the night. Anyone who was paying attention would notice that Olga and her men were nursing their drinks while the exhausted Drevlians drained their cups. A few hours into the night, the Drevlian soldiers were almost blind drunk, but some of them may still have noticed the glint of Rus swords unsheathing. The funeral feast soon became the prelude to many other funerals, as Olga's army massacred every last Drevlian in attendance. Her vengeance continued for another year, as she mustered up an even larger army to wipe out the last of the Drevlians in a series of bloody battles. The holdout was Korosten, the heavily fortified Drevlian capital. Hoping to end things peacefully, she sent them a letter saying, "Why do you persist in holding out? All your cities have surrendered to me and submitted to tribute, so that the inhabitants now cultivate their fields and their lands in peace. But you had rather die of hunger without submitting to tribute. And what was her tribute? 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from every home in Korostan. It looked like a good deal, at least to anyone who hadn't noticed that all of Grand Princess Olga's deals seemed perfect until the sword fell. The birds were gathered and presented as tribute. Olga accepted them graciously, then tied cloth and sulfur to their wings and set them alight. But when the flaming birds were released, they flew back to their nests in Korostan, setting the city of mostly wooden buildings completely ablaze. And as thousands fled, Olga and her soldiers slaughtered almost all of them and turned the survivors into slaves. So many thousands had died because of the murder of one unfortunate prince. When it comes to the most brutal revenge stories in history, though, no one can hold a candle to the viciousness of Genghis Khan, the ruler of the Mongol Empire. The Khan to end all Khans showed exactly why in 1219, when a hit to his personal pride led to the revenge-driven destruction of an entire empire. It began with the best of intentions on the Mongol emperor's part. He wanted to establish friendly trade relations with the Khwarezmian Empire, a Muslim state that spans much of present-day Iran, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. Their territory was less than half the size of what the Mongols had already conquered, so they were fortunate to receive such generous terms from a ruler known for his merciless campaigns. Genghis recruited a caravan of Muslim merchants and gave them his message and terms to deliver to Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II, the empire's ruler. But it was never to be. When the merchants passed through the city of Otrar, the local governor, Inalshuk, had the group arrested as spies. They were swiftly tortured and executed. One of them managed to escape, though, and run across the perilous desert back to Genghis. An important thing to know about Mongol culture is that they considered traveling merchants, diplomats, and envoys to be an almost sacred class of people. To lay a hand on one was a grave insult against the person who sent them. It wouldn't have surprised anyone if Genghis Khan had decided to go scorched earth on the entire empire there and then, but against all odds, he continued to take the diplomatic route with the Khwarezmian Empire. He sent another envoy straight to Shah Muhammad II with 2 simple demands: that the governor of Otrar be punished for his crime, and that he be compensated for the loss of life and his property. That didn't happen. The Shah had actually been the one who told the governor to arrest and execute the merchants the first time around. This time, he arrested everyone who'd arrived to deliver him the message. The lesser envoys had their beards forcibly shaved off, a huge insult against Mongol masculinity of the time. He then also beheaded the lead envoy and sent his severed head back to Genghis. This may have been the most foolish decision that anyone in the entire Khwarezmian Empire had ever made. Genghis decided it would be better to show why he'd become the most feared ruler the world had ever known. Instead of envoys, he sent an army of tens of thousands. They flooded the streets of Otrar, massacring everyone in sight and soon capturing the governor. He was forced to his knees by Mongol soldiers and had molten metal poured into his eyes, mouth, and ears, perhaps to mock him for his greed in robbing the merchants he executed. This was really just the shot across the bow for what would become the full-scale invasion of the Khwarezmian Empire. Millions perished as the Mongol army pillaged and conquered, and all of this could have been avoided if the Shah had been a better host.
They emerge from the caustic fog. Chlorine and bromine cling to their lungs like something dragged out of a nightmare. They lurch forward, groaning, uniforms half melted and hanging in strips, faces slick with blood. Each step looks like it might be their last, but they keep coming. The German forces, heavily armed and equipped with protective gear, gasp in horror. Nothing could have survived the bombardment they unleashed. And yet, something has. Their skin is burnt and mottled. Their tongues are blistered and blackened in their mouths. All that emerges from their burbling throats are terrifying, wet screams. Every time one of them coughs and splutters in their mad charge towards the numerically superior German forces, they hack up a necrotic wad of lung meat. The Germans begin to panic. It's like a terror conjured from their deepest imaginations. They break ranks, some discard their weapons and run for their godforsaken lives, away from the cloud, away from these revenant monsters. Future historians will call this horrifying incident Attack of the Dead Men, The poison gas bombardment from the German forces on the Russian Agoge fortress in northeastern Poland had already effectively killed these men. Their organs melted from the inside, their weapons rendered useless. But the iron will of a soldier is often the last thing to corrode. The Germans will regroup and try to crush the defenses of this fortress, but the world will forever remember when a handful of walking corpses terrified one of the strongest armies in the world. And this wasn't even the most brutal battle in history. The Battle of Cannae. 216 BC. It's not a fight, any more than it can be said that the pig fights the butcher. Roman infantry are packed so tightly that there's no room to swing a sword, no space even to move your arms. Shoulder to shoulder, shield to shield, the line collapses into a single crushing mass of men. You can't see beyond the few faces pressed in around you, but you feel it, the slow, relentless push, as the formation compresses deeper into the chaos. The pressure grows on your armor and your bones, pushing the air out of your lungs. And worse still, you can hear something in the distance. Screaming, the hacking of flesh. It's impossible. You vastly outnumbered the enemy. 80,000 Roman soldiers, the largest force that the Republic has ever assembled. How did the tables turn so violently? Of course, it would be the work of one of Rome's greatest enemies, Hannibal of Carthage. When Rome's generals heard that Hannibal had taken the Roman grain magazine of Cannae, it seemed like the greatest chance to crush this upstart. They could quell the threat of the Carthaginians for good. Little did they know, this is exactly what Hannibal is hoping for. Even with his inferior 50,000 troops, it seems as though fate is on his side. A brutal Libeccio wind tears across the field, kicking up a choking dust storm that rolls across the battlefield. Hannibal has planned for this. He positions his army to the north, forcing the Romans to face south, straight into the wind. The Romans are focused on their numerical superiority, so they don't notice that Hannibal has already manipulated the terrain to his advantage. He's penned the Roman forces into a narrow valley, bordered by a river that makes easy escape impossible. As the Roman forces advance, Hannibal exploits the flexibility of his troops, shaping his line into a broad crescent. He flanks the Roman forces on the left and right, but still, the Romans don't spot what's happening. They keep pushing forward, perhaps hoping to break Hannibal's ranks with the sheer number of troops at their disposal. Nobody will notice until it's too late that the 2 points on the ends of Hannibal's crescent formation are beginning to converge around the Roman forces, turning it into a circle. All 80,000 Roman troops are trapped inside. The army's greatest advantage, their size, has become their greatest weakness. As Hannibal's soldiers push in, the soldiers pile on top of each other, crushing, suffocating, leaving no way to escape. And then, the real slaughter begins. Hannibal's forces wield their falcata, brutal curved swords, perfect for a weighted downward hacking motion, and they put their falcata to work. While the Roman forces scream and struggle underneath their own weight, Hannibal's men slash and carve. Necks are ripped open, limbs cut off. The razor edges of swords rip armor and skin and flesh and bone. The whipping winds soon reek of the blood falling to the ground in great warm gouts as the outer ranks of Romans are reduced to butchered stacks of meat. In the hours that follow, more Romans fall than at any other point in the Republic's proud history. 20% of Roman fighting men between the ages of 18 and 50 died at Cannae, wiped out under the unforgiving blades of Hannibal's men. Hannibal lost only 6,000 men. Of the Roman troops, only 14,000 were able to escape the unthinkable slaughter. Another 10,000 were captured and held prisoner. The rest lay in pieces at Cannae, barely recognizable as anything once resembling humans. It was an incident that shook the Roman Republic to its very core. If Hannibal had used this momentum to mount an immediate attack on the capital, he may just have achieved his dreams of wiping Rome as we know it off the map. It was only his inaction and the decision of the Republic to engage more cautiously with the Carthaginian in future that prevented them from facing total ruin. But even if this wasn't the decisive point that gave Hannibal the eternal winning streak, it let him put his bloody mark on history. He was the architect of one of the greatest acts of battlefield butchery ever witnessed by human eyes. The battles of the ancient world were horrific and visceral, but the invention of modern weapons took the brutal lethality of warfare to a whole new level. The Battle of Verdun. February 21st, 1916. For 10 hours straight, hell rains from the sky. 808 German heavy artillery guns fire shell after shell, millions of them battering the landscape and decimating anyone unlucky enough to be caught out in the open. The non-stop rumble of long-range machine guns can be heard across the French countryside, nearly 100 miles away. At midday, the firing stops, but only long enough to lull the enemy into a false sense of security. Any French soldiers left alive after the morning's carnage are in for a nasty surprise. When they reveal their positions, they're quickly dispatched by German shock troops waiting along the banks of the nearby river. Their orders are simple: bleed France white. The worst part, after all the blood spilled, this is still only the first day of the longest and most brutal engagement of the First World War, the Battle of Verdun. The German army, though, have a different name for their offensive: Operation Judgment. Verdun is a town on the River Meuse and site of an imposing fortress called Fort Douaumont, which was part of a massive defensive ring of concrete forts. The fortified city has kept France safe from invaders for hundreds of years. That's precisely why the Germans have chosen it as their target. The logic being that the French could never bring themselves to surrender the city and will defend it down to the last man. Taking the territory itself is incidental. The true purpose is to waste French resources, drag the conflict out as long as possible, and slaughter as many enemy men as they can. That mission will prove to be terrifyingly easy. Verdun is located near a German railroad. Meanwhile, French supply lines and communications are weak. The fort's location on the river provides German troops with not one, but 3 angles from which to attack. Renovations to the fort were completed in the 1880s, adding steel and concrete reinforcements to the fort walls to make it more resistant to artillery. But that was still 30 years ago. It's a terrifying new century, where new technology makes mass death possible on a scale that was never before thought possible. In gaps between artillery shelling, observation aircraft circle overhead, hunting for survivors. Infantry troops attack with not just rifles and hand grenades, but also with something new: flamethrowers. Over the last 2 years, combatants on all sides have gotten used to the pace of this war. Agonizingly slow, fought by attrition just as much as with weapons, but Verdun is different. Through the force of their ruthlessly efficient onslaught, the Germans have already advanced 3 miles and captured the nearby forest of Bois des Cours. 2 French battalions managed to hold them for 2 days, but dwindling supplies forced them into retreat. By February 25th, Fort Douaumont has fallen to the Germans. Desperate to defend Verdun at all costs, France's commander-in-chief Marshal Joseph Joffre puts Philippe Pétain in charge of the city's defense. Pétain wastes no time and takes personal command of the artillery units, reorganizing the heavy guns so that the more the Germans advance, the more they expose themselves to attack. But there's another problem now. By late February, spring is on its way, turning the hard earth into a swamp. Sudden snowstorms followed by warming and thawing has left the soldiers on both sides damp and freezing. But the thick mud has the benefit of stopping German advancement for a few days, giving France a chance to re-establish supply lines. As many as 12,000 supply trucks are brought in from nearby Bar-le-Duc down a road that will gain the local nickname of the Sacred Way after the war. These trucks are in constant rotation and are under constant threat from German artillery. If a truck is shot at, it's immediately abandoned. There's no time to stop for repairs with the enemy bearing down on you. But the chain runs like a Swiss watch. It's estimated that one arrives on the battlefield every 14 seconds at the height of the conflict. Under Pétain's leadership, the French army is able to hold their own and keep the Germans out of the Verdun, though they still manage to steadily creep forward, claiming sections of the forest. Even though the French have yet to fully shake themselves off after the brutal first day of bombardment, with new troops and supplies, they start to launch their own limited offensives. The Germans are forced to extend their lines in an attempt to take out the French artillery completely. March and April become a gory back and forth of artillery bombardment, turning the thick woods into muddy wastelands strewn with corpses and spent shells. Despite the deaths, no major gains are made. One village, Vaux, is captured and recaptured 16 times throughout the conflict. Germany continues to grind France down, but progress is now punishingly slow. France continues to hold a key position, a hill aptly named Le Mort Homme, the Dead Man. And as the battle wears on, another threat makes itself known to both sides: the elements. Spring rain fills the trenches with mud and water, infested with rats and the filth of hundreds of men living and dying in close proximity. Even those who manage to survive artillery, grenades, and flamethrowers succumb to infection. Trenchfoot is endemic. The horrific condition causes the feet to painfully swell, and is a result of standing in ankle-deep water for long periods of time. Weather starts to improve by May, and the pace of battle starts to pick up again. The Germans take Le Mort Homme, then the French surrender Fort Vaux. In June, the Germans advance on two more key forts, Souvy and Tavannes. These gains are made with the help of another horrifying new weapon. On the night of June 22nd, 116,000 shells marked with green crosses are fired at the French artillery positions. When the shells make contact, they don't explode. Instead, they fill the air with a compound called diphosgene, so toxic it could even destroy the filters of the French soldiers' gas masks. Over 1,600 men are suffocated to death that night, and the next morning, Germany is able to completely overrun French defenses and get within 3 miles of the Verdun citadel. The 1st of July sees the Battle of the Somme, which means troops and equipment from both sides are rerouted across the country to take part in this new conflict. But it didn't stop the Germans from trying to take Verdun. They had a mission here: to bleed every last French soldier dry until there was nobody to defend the position, and the people of France begged their government to surrender. But in trying to do so, they only wasted more and more of their own resources and faced worse and worse casualties. By the 9th of July, not even the gas shells were effective. The French had developed new masks with filters that were specifically designed for diphosgene. The grueling back and forth continues as it did in the spring, with huge losses on both sides, but no significant territory gained. The tide starts to turn when Pétain is promoted, leaving General Robert Nivelle to take up his old position. Nivelle has a bold new strategy: creeping barrage. The artillerists fire a curtain of shells, which blast through the enemy and make room for the infantry to advance forward. With this technique, France is able to reclaim Fort Douaumont in October. Then, in November, they launch heavy bombardment on Fort Vaux that lasts an entire week. There's a lull in battle. Then in December, Nivelle launches the second defensive. The French troops reach the front line, and after 10 agonizing months, the battle finally comes to an end on December 18, 1916. An estimated 337,000 German soldiers and 377,000 French soldiers were killed in what will be remembered as one of the bloodiest battles of the Great War. But being on that nightmarish battlefield would still be preferable to what's next. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir. The Marine's hand shakes as he draws his combat knife and tries to cut through the blood-soaked, frozen fabric of his fellow soldier. He's sweating from the exertion, but it has already turned to painful ice crystals against his skin. It's below -30. Early December 1950, deep in Korea's most mountainous region. His hands are shaking. The Marine's friend is moaning like a wounded animal when he pulls the ripped cloth away, peeling it up from his skin. The 3-day-old bullet wound underneath is sickening. Black, frostbitten, but swollen and dripping with caustic gangrenous pus. He's a goner, but there's no relief. All the morphine that could have eased his passing is frozen solid in its syringes. They're outnumbered on this bitter pass, 4-1, 30,000 UN soldiers and US ex-corps Marines up against 120,000 Chinese troops, surrounding them on every side in the frigid hellhole they call Chosin Reservoir. They're what's left, retreating after a sudden influx of Chinese communist soldiers have poured into the Korean peninsula and smashed the US vanguard in a lethal surprise attack. The troops escaping here will someday be known as the Chosin Few, but the ones that actually survive these brutal 17 days will be even fewer. The whipping winds carrying sheets of snow and sleet reduces visibility to almost nothing in front of them, making evac from the air difficult. Their combat knives and the butts of their rifles will be invaluable now, as the cold is bad enough at this point to make their firearms inoperable. They're like the soldiers of yore. If they want to survive this, it'll be by virtue of their strength and fury and their will to live, even if it means ripping through an enemy with your bare hands. They're pushing southeastward, ignoring the agony of the cold and the crushing weight of their equipment. Normally, you're in the most danger as a sitting duck out in the open. Not here. Things take a truly horrifying turn when the UN forces and the ROK soldiers and civilians traveling with them are forced through the narrowest route up through the mountains towards the evacuation point. The escape route runs up through the high ground between Kotori and Chinhongni, a choke point carved into ice and rock. Chinese soldiers are closing in on all sides, and in some places, the gravel path beneath their feet is only wide enough to walk single file. They inch through 70 miles of horror on that unpaved mountain road. The ones who succumb to their wounds just have to be left. Frostbitten toes fall off inside boots and rattle. When groups of enemy troops attack, ranks break, and the fighting splits into brutal one-on-one battles. Bayonets pierce skin and flesh, screams ring out, only to gurgle through blood in the throat. Tactical shovels and rocks bash open skulls. Sometimes, in the thick of fighting, brawlers stumble together and roll down to mutual death in the crags below, where they will never be recovered. Enemy fire rings overhead, the cracking reports of rifles. Occasionally, a head among the UN coalition snaps back. The sniped soldiers fall to the ground with an arc of blood and brain spraying out of their perforated skull. Their last thoughts are already freezing and half buried in snow by the time they hit the ground. No time to mourn, no time to bury. Keep moving, or join them. In the unforgiving Korean mountainside, Chinese soldiers with skin like brittle porcelain are frozen into the rock face. More of these soldiers die from the sheer ravages of the brutal cold than anything that actually happens in combat. In their superiors' haste to deploy them, they haven't been given proper winter gear. The cold punishes them even more than their American and European foes on the frostbitten slopes. Some respite from the blockade comes when Marine Corps fighter bombers from the naval backup streak ahead, raining hellfire down upon the entrenched Chinese forces. Screams and explosions, that metallic stink of blood and burned flesh and smoke rising up in great pillars towards the sky. No medieval painter etching out their vision of hell could imagine anything as horrible. Fire and ice as one. Scattered body parts, the moans of the dying barely competing with the snarl of the endless wind. You'd cry if your tears weren't already frozen to your cracked, blood-stained cheeks. The men fight bravely, but nature doesn't make exceptions for valor. Over the course of the brutal retreat, the 1st Marine Division loses almost 4,400 men to combat and 7,300 to the cold. Both sides are starving thanks to inadequate food supplies and often an inability to carry what little food they actually have. Muscles pump acid as the march goes on. You cannot sleep. You cannot rest. If you stop, you'll freeze like all the others. Artillery support from divisions on the other side of the blockade makes advancing easier, though the endless sounds of explosions and screams ringing in the ears of the fighters feels like a wound to the soul. And for every enemy soldier that they stab or blow up or gun down, it seems like legions more simply pour in to take their place. Such a reversal in the fortunes of the US in the Korean War seemed almost unimaginable mere weeks earlier. After fleeing across the frozen ice to the inner perimeter, a volunteer rescue party went right back into the thick of it to save 84 of the wounded who'd been left behind. Eventually, the surviving chosen few managed to escape the horrors of the pass and the blockade. If this hadn't been done, dozens more surely would have been added to the death toll. But for as unimaginably brutal as the horrors of the chosen reservoir battle were, it still seems like gentlemanly warfare compared to the abject nightmare to come. The Battle of Stalingrad. For the citizens of Stalingrad, the last few months have been nothing short of hell on earth. In what used to be the streets of their city, ripped apart by tank tracks and Luftwaffe explosives, they duck around the relentless fire of snipers that have smashed skulls and spilled brains onto the nearby concrete. It's been minus 40 degrees these last few days, but they can barely feel the pain of their frozen skin or numb limbs. While squads of soldiers rip each other to shreds in the streets, they duck around corners, hiding in shadows. They form foraging parties to find anything that might resemble food. Digging through the frozen earth for worms, boiling and eating old leather. Some even resort to feasting on the flesh of the dead when the choice is that or death. But the emaciated corpses in the street show that many didn't make that same choice. The survivors, for as long as they can keep that title, are sick and terrified, rats chewing on the dead in the streets. Their hair is infested with lice, and the air, even in these freezing temperatures, is thick with smoke and buzzing flies. Dysentery, typhus, diphtheria, tuberculosis, and pneumonia run rampant, with no medical supplies left to treat them. A civilian population of 400,000 will be reduced to between 10 and 60,000 by the time the horrors are done. But many of the survivors won't be happy they made it out alive, given the struggle, starvation, and slavery that awaits them. The Nazis are eager to slaughter and deport them when they see them, and the Soviet regime refuses to help them escape. If they end up in the clutches of either army, they'll be forced into manual labor for the war effort. In the ruins of a nearby city block, a group of Soviet soldiers, grizzled and powered by little more than hate and righteous vengeance now, occupy the 4th floor. A group of Wehrmacht soldiers occupy the 3rd floor below them. The Germans turn their rifles up, the Russians down, and they fire at each other through the floor and ceiling, each screaming in rage. Bullets tear bodies apart, men collapse and bleed. When the empty magazines lead to feudal clicks, the combatants draw their combat knives and rush to meet each other, carving into their flesh with mad abandon. It's the darkest depths of urban warfare. This is happening in over 20 buildings at once, while out on the streets, bodies are splattered under the treads of tanks, limbs are blown off by grenades, snipers and machine gunners fire on crowds with impunity. Soldiers of both sides stack the corpses that litter the streets like sandbags to provide some meager protection from the bullets. These bodies have ceased to be brothers in arms, comrades, or civilians now. It's all just rotten meat. Over an unimaginably brutal 6 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days, the tide of the Second World War will forever turn against Nazi Germany, but it will claim the lives of 1 to 3 million people in the process. It is considered by most military historians and scholars to be the largest and costliest battle in all of human history. It all began on July 17, 1942, in an objective personally demanded by Adolf Hitler himself. Stalingrad, the major Russian industrial city on the river Volga, must be captured by the German forces. Not only would claiming the city give Germany direct access to the oil fields of the Caucasus and give them a stage to wipe out the Red Army, it also had a secondary propaganda objective. If they could claim the city that bore Stalin's name, it would humiliate the Russian people and devastate Red Army morale. Stalin knew this and ordered his generals to defend the city no matter the cost. The full might of the German and Russian armies were converging in one city to battle to the bitter end. The two leaders behind them would punish retreat or surrender with death. It's a recipe for the most horrific bloodbath in history. Before the ground assault comes the Luftwaffe, blotting out the skies above Stalingrad and dropping over 1,000 tons of explosives on the city over the course of a single week. Buildings crumble, smoke rises, and screaming civilians, blackened with soot, many severely burned and missing limbs or cradling the charred corpses of loved ones, spill out onto the streets. They targeted military, economic, and industrial nerve centers in the city, flying low thanks to poor air defenses, hoping to soften it up for the conquest to come on land. In the following months came the tanks, and soon the ground troops, spilling into the city in the quick and ruthless style of the German blitzkrieg by early September. Claiming the banks along the Volga by October, the Axis forces penetrated deep into the city, causing chaos and horror in their wake. When the Soviets press back, battles rage on every front, squads trading gunfire in the streets or engaging in brutal hand-to-hand brawls in the city's ruined buildings. During the cold and dreadful nights, stealthy detachments of Soviet soldiers set their minds to butchery. They leave their outposts with knives, cleavers, hammers, and hatchets, hunting like packs of jackals for German troops wandering unfamiliar streets, tired, hungry, and afraid. When they find these stragglers, the most anyone hears is a dry, choked yelp before the soldiers set upon them and take them apart in the streets. No wasted bullets, no echoing reports that could draw in sympathetic Germans, not clean, but quiet and ruthlessly efficient. They drag the bodies out of the streets, if they're still in one piece enough to drag. By February 1943, the fighting is over. The Axis forces have been repelled, and the Red Army have been galvanized to continue their relentless march into German territory. There, they'll even the score with relentless atrocities of their own against the German populace, but none could really truly hold a candle to the horrors of Stalingrad. The city is apocalyptic in the battle's wake, buildings completely leveled, with millions dead and millions more mutilated, traumatized, and grieving. The blood that's been spilled alone could drown thousands. Stalingrad proved that extreme warfare turns ordinary men into monsters.
The Istandar drifts through the bazaar of a mole in his silk and jewels, a bored expression etched on his face. 4 massive guards lurk at his side, each with a deadly shamshir sheathed on their belts. It's 1098. Persia is fractured. Warlords, bandits, and rival factions tear at each other, while crusaders wage war in the distance. But life goes on. You'd need to be a fool or a madman to believe you have any chance of getting close to the leader of the province, yet a beggar in old gray robes tries. He approaches the Istandar, hands outstretched, before being roughly shoved away by one of the guards. When the beggar pleads for charity, one of the guards spits on him. The Istandar is rolling his eyes at a short, portly vendor when it happens. As soon as the guards glance away, the hobbling beggar throws off his robe, revealing a young man no older than 25. He's wearing a brilliant white tunic with a crimson sash tied across it. He leaps at the Istandar with almost supernatural speed. In the same motion, he unsheathes a card, a long, straight blade with a handle made of bone. The Istandar doesn't even have time to turn around before the 10-inch blade of the card is forced into his neck, severing tendons and slicing arteries. A jet of steaming, ruby blood erupts forward and splatters onto the purple silk that the merchant was trying to sell just moments ago. The assassin pulls out the blade and forces it back in, opening a new ragged hole in the Istandar's soft skin. He stabs again and again. His white tunic is drenched in crimson by the time the guards draw their shamshirs and pounce. The market descends into chaos. Customers and merchants scream as they flee in every direction. Some are trampled to death beneath the feet of the others. Yet the killer doesn't react. He doesn't try to run. The only thing he experiences is total and complete focus. He lets the card drop to the ground alongside the twitching body of the Istandar. As the shamshirs rend his flesh and bone and he collapses into an expanding pile of his own blood, he just looks at the ceiling and laughs. He sees the light shining in from the windows up above. A contented smile spreads across his face. It's almost like he can see paradise already. This is the way of the Hashashin, a member of a secret society in medieval Persia, and some of the most famous and feared killers in all of human history. And you're about to start your new life as one. Your journey into this shadowy world of death begins on the mean streets of Hamadan, one of the oldest cities in Persia. You live a hard life as an itinerant laborer, doing odd jobs for just enough to get you at least one meal a day, most of the time. You dress in rags and are often moved along by the city guards if you linger in some of the settlement's more affluent areas. The days are blisteringly hot, even more so when you're working your calloused hands and blistered fingers to the bone. The nights, when you sleep on the streets, are bitterly cold. Sometimes you're kept awake by the rattling sound of your own chattering teeth. Your endless carousel of bosses treat you like you are worse than dirt. You're beaten and sworn at by the taskmasters for not doing your job fast enough, which is then used as an excuse to dock what little pay you actually get. In the morning, you acknowledge the call to prayer and prostrate yourself towards Mecca. Every time, you silently beseech Allah for a way out of this terrible life you found yourself in. Of the hunger that claws at your belly, of the dust and sand that dries out your throat, of the beatings and the disrespect, of the endless boredom of sleeping every night only to wake up and do it all again. More than anything, you want a sense of purpose in life, a calling that would give you a worthy answer to the question, why do I exist? One day, as you wander the streets, you find your attention captured by a street preacher spreading the word of the Quran to a small group of supplicants. You can tell from his rhetoric that he's a follower of Nizari Ismailism, a secretive sect of Shia Islam that believes their living imam is the absolute, divinely guided earthly representative of Allah. He was chosen by Allah to be the Mahdi, the rightly guided one, the one who will lead the faithful, reform Islam, and deliver justice and equality today.
Justice and equality, you think. You sure could use a little of that right now. You listen to the preacher's words before he produces a basket hidden behind him and begins handing out bread to you and the others. It's part of his duty of zakat, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, a religious duty to give charity to the needy. You have no desire to turn it down. You devour the bread and drink deeply of the water he offers. It must be the satisfaction of it, but soon you find your body feeling heavy, sluggish, slow, and then you lose consciousness. How much time has passed? You have no idea, but the sun shines through your eyelids. You open them to see you're laying on what appears to be a pile of expensive silken pillows. Beautiful women emerge all around you, carrying plates of exotic meat and fruit and jugs of milk and honey. It's a place beyond all mortal imagination.
What's happening? You ask. Is this some kind of dream?
The women all look at one another and playfully giggle.
Not a dream, one of them says. Your soul left your body in that alley. This is paradise, the embodiment of Allah's grace. Here, your every need, your every desire is going to be taken care of.
You can't believe it. Allah must have heard your prayers and answered. Before you have any chance to question whether this is all too good to be true, the women are already upon you. They feed you grapes off the vine, offer choice cuts of meat that you never would have been able to afford when you were alive, pour unlimited drinks. Every one of your senses seems heightened. The sights are more beautiful. Food and scents and touch are all more intensely pleasurable. This must be how it is to be a pure soul deprived of an earthly body. Not once do you consider that all of this heightened sensation is actually due to the huge quantities of opium and hashish now flowing through your bloodstream. Days blend into night, and you don't care about the passage of time. This is the greatest feeling you've ever experienced. But after the high comes the crash. On the 3rd night, you lay your head to rest on the pillows, surrounded by the beautiful maidens who adore you. But when you wake, you're on a cold stone floor. Your vision is blurry, and your head pounds from the grinding come-down of the chemical cocktail that was coursing through your veins. And in this darkness stands the Grand Master, Hassan-i-Sabah, looking as large and as powerful as Allah himself. You've heard the local legends. Almost everyone in the area has. To his followers in the order of the Hashashin, he is tantamount to the Mahdi. He is a leader, a scholar, and an expert killer, who carries himself with the poise and dignity of an ancient king. Before him, you can only tremble.
I am the one who holds the key to paradise, he says. If you choose to follow my path, all that is holy is to obey my commands, and all that is unholy is to defy me. My men can drop you in that alley again, so that you will never experience paradise and will forever feel the chill of its absence. Or you can follow me, and your place there after death will be assured. What say you?
Your head is still reeling, the room spins, but your mind is filled with thoughts of the absolute euphoria of the past 3 days. All you can do is nod like a fool, strings of drool hanging from your mouth.
You are my master. I will follow you to paradise.
Hassan-i smiles. And just like that, your new life as a member of the Hashashin has begun. You're one of many poor young men dragged off the streets and shown into the private valley embedded deep inside the Alamut Fortress, a place that, to some hapless, starving peasant, truly would feel like a glimpse into paradise. You and all the others have no idea how you're being manipulated, but if you did, you might not take so readily to your training. Your clothes are taken, and your name is no more. You're given the uniform of the Hashashin, a simple white tunic with some element of red, like a wound cut across snow-pale skin. For you, it's a sash that goes from your shoulder to your opposite hip. For others, it's gloves or boots or a hat. The uniformity is important. It reminds you that you're just another one of the hundreds of sprawling arms of Hassani Sabah. You train with swords and daggers, bows, arrows, and slings. You learn to recognize different types of poison by sight and smell alone. You learn from which plant each one is derived and what effect it has upon its victims. You train to become a master of disguise so that you could pass as anyone, a rich man, royal envoy, soldier, or blind beggar. Sometimes you see your Hashashin brethren return with blood on their blades and tunics from slaying crusaders or eliminating targets on commission. Some live to become storied contract killers. Others die in the line of duty. Those are the ones you envy. You've tasted paradise now, and you know that to die in service is the greatest honor. Guarantees you'll return to that luxurious heaven. You can't wait to fulfill that destiny, but not until you're given permission by your leader. You soon recognize the wisdom of the Grand Master. In fact, in the time you spend exposed to him during training, you realize he's more than just a great warrior. The man is a genius. He can speak with great authority on matters of mathematics and geometry. As an expert astronomer, he can chart and navigate the stars of the night sky. He can speak multiple languages and is a keen scholar of religion and philosophy. How such a man, who could have done anything he wanted, ended up becoming the leader of a murderous mountain cult is beyond you. You beg him for a mission, for a chance to fight and have a glorious death in his name. But he doesn't hand you a sword. He hands you a broom handle and tells you that you're being given a special new assignment. You're going to become a sleeper. You don't quite follow, but the Grand Master explains.
You will go to Khorasan, hundreds of miles from here, and infiltrate the camp of the Seljuk Turk Sultanate. There, you are to integrate yourself and get closer to the Sultan. Then, you will await further instruction.
You wonder if perhaps you're being tricked, if maybe this is some kind of test of wisdom or of loyalty. Surely your master, the very mouthpiece of paradise, wouldn't just ship you off to Khorasan to play stable boy to some fat, heretical sultan. But you're too deep in now to resist the commands. Within hours, you're wearing local clothing as a disguise and joining a caravan headed into Sultanate territory. You don't understand your mission, but you will carry out your Grand Master's wishes, no matter what. When you reach the Sultanate in Khorasan, though, you begin to realize that this task will be far harder than you imagine. You're able to secure a job cleaning manure out of the royal stables. It's filthy and demeaning, like all the jobs you had before joining the Order of Hashashin, but it's all part of the mission. You are obedient. You are loyal. On the long days of particularly back-breaking labor, being yelled at and whipped by the stablemaster, you think of paradise. If you do your duty, you know you will someday return there. The days turn to weeks, the weeks to months, the months to years. After 3 years of toiling in the stables, your hard work and loyalty are recognized by your superiors. You're invited into a comparatively comfortable role in the Sultan's palace, where you'll act as a servant. You'll sweep floors, tidy messes, help in the kitchens, and on rare occasions, you'll pour wine for the Sultan himself. Suddenly, you begin to see the wisdom of the Grand Master. In a position like this, you'll be close to the Sultan, and when the order comes, it will be so easy to slip poison into his wine or run him through with a dagger in the middle of his court. All you need to do is wait for the order. You sweep the palace floors, and you wait. You clean up the mess of raucous palace festivities, and you wait. You do menial work in the kitchen, and you wait. You stand at the side of the Sultan, fingers practically itching to strike the decadent pig as you pour him a tall goblet of wine. But you wait. All the while, even more days, weeks, and months march by. But waiting isn't just an idle duty. The Sultan can often be paranoid, and his guards are always on the lookout for spies, rebels, subversives, and of course, assassins. The character you're playing must always be maintained. An incorrect bit of local dialect, a suspicious slip of the accent, a mannerism that draws too much attention to itself. Any of these could be a death sentence. Horrifying death it would be. You saw this for yourself when one of the cooks was accused of attempting to poison the Sultan. He was beaten by guards before being dragged out to the courtyard. There, the men produced a two-handled saw, suspended the man upside down, placed the saw's teeth between his legs. Over the course of a torturous 10 minutes, the two guards sawed downwards until the blade reached the base of the cook's neck. It seemed only then that the poor fool stopped screaming. It's your 5th year in Khorasan, and you're at a market near the Grand City Bazaar, not far from the Citadel, when you catch a funny glint in a silk merchant's eye. He sells you a roll and tells you to be extra careful with it, and you take it from him without any reaction. You unwrap the silk when back in your quarters and find a small scroll written in a coded script inside, a code that you'd spent months learning back at the Alamut Fortress. But when you read the words at first, you're sure that you must be mistranslating it or that this is another one of the Grand Master's tests. But there's no point in second-guessing. It's like he said, "If you choose to follow my path, all that is holy is to obey my commands, and all that is unholy is to defy me." It's time. This is it. When night falls, you slip through the palace. In your time here, you've learned every detail of the building, every shortcut, every hidden corridor. You've memorized the patrol routes of all the guards. It's no effort at all to slip by them after 5 years of anticipation, and it doesn't take long for you to steal away into the Sultan's bedchambers, where he sleeps, wine-drunk, completely and utterly defenseless. You reach into your robes and pull out a dagger with a small piece of paper tied around its handle. Its blade is coated in a poison that would give anyone a painful death if it so much as pierced their skin. You raise the dagger up into the air above the sleeping Sultan and stab it into the ground next to his face. After that, you slip out of the room, out of the palace, and by the time the Sultan awakens, out of Khorasan entirely. The mission was not to kill the Sultan that night, but he almost keels over when he sees the blade. The note around the dagger's handle reads, "We have eyes and hands everywhere." But it's the beginning of the end for him. He realizes that despite his palace, despite his forces, despite all his power, there's nothing that can truly protect him from his enemies. The thought paralyzes him. Paranoia and fear consume his mind. He orders executions and torture to try to squeeze the answers out of his own staff, having no idea that by now you've long since blown away in the wind. Your absence won't be noticed. It's not like anyone ever bothers to learn the names of all the servants. It's only when you hear the news of the Sultan's forces dissolving and of his retreat back to his stronghold that you understand the wisdom of the Grand Master. If he'd simply murdered the Sultan in his bed, the Sultan's son, with a newly forged taste for revenge, would ascend to power. He would likely send his full forces on the warpath. This way, the Sultan's terror is his own undoing, the crack that sends the whole mountain tumbling down. What follows is the golden age of your career as a Hashashin. You slash countless throats with your curved Jambiya dagger, ending the lives of everyone from soldiers to merchants. You pull rope around the throats of politicians and squeeze until the blood vessels burst in their eyes before letting their corpses go limp. On one occasion, when a minor noble was able to get the jump on you during what should be a routine assassination, you beat him to death with your bare hands. Every murder feels like a tribute offered up to paradise, a duty carried out. Of course, intimidation is often just as effective as violence. One sword keeps another in its sheath, as the old saying goes. It's always been a part of Hashashin philosophy that the targeted killing of one well-selected victim can often save the thousands of lives that would inevitably be lost during all-out warfare. Threatening letters are pinned to doors with poisoned knives, displays of vulnerabilities, the bragging of the Hashashin ability to seemingly be anywhere at any time. More often than not, it's enough to get even a truly powerful man to stand down. But not always. Such is the case for the Istandar, a petty noble placed under contract by the Hashashin. At first, you try the same intimidation tactics to scare him back into line and cease his course of action. But this time, it doesn't work. He digs in his heels and begins to take the threat of assassination out against his own populace. Every day, a new civilian is dragged out into the streets and beheaded by the Istandar's men just to show his ruthlessness. It seems that there's no reaching him in his mansion. Between the structure of the building itself and the sheer number of guards posted, infiltration with a chance of success is low. Instead, you watch him. Just as you did the Sultan in Khorasan, you know that if you follow his moves for long enough, you'll be able to find some point of attack, a time when he has his guard down. After a few months of relentless observation, you notice that every so often,
he visits the Bazaar of a Mole. He's still protected, of course, but with only 4 armed guards. Still, the chances of you being able to land a death blow and get away alive are close to none. But you'd be lying if you said that didn't excite you. After all these years of devotion, you have a chance to die honorably in the commission of your duties, a chance to return. Picking out the perfect tattered cloak and working on your stumbling elderly gait, you know they'll never suspect a thing until it's too late. It makes you smile as you sheath your card and tuck it behind your sash. The day has finally arrived. The Bazaar of a Mole is a suffocating wall of heat filled with shouting merchants, men, and animals. The Istandar stops at a stall. He runs his hand over a bolt of purple silk. His 4 armored guards form a wall of heavy steel around him. You lean heavily on your walking stick, playing the elderly beggar perfectly, and begin hobbling towards him. 15 feet, 10 feet, 5. You stretch your hands towards the Istandar and plead for a coin, a crumb of food, any bit of charity. One of the guards turns and pushes you away. One of the others spits on you, and this momentary lapse is the exact moment you need. In one motion, you throw off your tattered cloak and draw your card. You spring forward between the guards and drive 10 inches of steel directly into the side of the Istandar's neck. Before anyone is even aware of what happened, hot blood violently erupts across the merchant's silk. You pull the blade out, opening a ragged hole in his skin. You force it back in. You stab again and again until your pristine white tunic is drenched in crimson. The market descends into absolute shrieking chaos. Civilians trample each other trying to flee as the Istandar falls to the dirt, dead long before he hits the ground. You don't try to run. Instead, you simply open your hand, your bloody card clattering onto the cobblestones next to his body. The 4 guards all pull their heavy shamshears from their scabbards and pounce on you, their steel coming down to rend your flesh and bones. But you do not scream. As your body is violently hacked to pieces, the agony is instantly washed away by a rush of memory. You smell the roasted meats. You taste the sweet wine. The golden light of the Alamut garden completely envelops your mind. Paradise, at last. Soon, stories of the violent murder of the Istandar in the Bazaar of a Mole begin to spread like a twisted fairy tale. It's just one more story of the terrifying, violent prowess of the Order of Hashashin, all with the same message, that the Hashashin can get you anywhere. Kings and sultans begin wearing chainmail underneath their robes, for fear that an assassin in a white tunic will emerge from the darkness and stab them to death. Their guards surround them while they sleep. Some have 2 or 3 different poison tasters, double and triple checking every bite they eat. And all of this terror is excellent for business. Leadership of the organization changes hands as old leaders die, but the group only grows over time. More fortresses pop up over the mountain ranges of Persia and Syria as more make their pilgrimage to join the now legendary group of killers. And their reputation as targeted murderers has also caught the interest of clients across the Middle East, eager to pay vast sums of money to see this dark brotherhood wipe out victims of their choice. For over a century from this point, they seem unstoppable. But while the Hashashin have a talent for murder, a group with an even more brutal penchant for warfare is already on its way. Over the decades, the advance of the Mongol armies has proved impossible to head off. The great Khan Munka has ordered an offensive against the Nazaris, the people of the Hashashin territory, and in 1253, the campaign intensifies. All the usual Hashashin tactics seem useless against the Mongols. If one of their generals is assassinated, he's simply replaced, and the armies keep riding forward. Attempts at sowing fear, doubt, and intimidation fall upon deaf ears. To the Mongols, threats are nothing against might. By 1256, the proud network of the Hashashin has completely collapsed as the Mongol armies massacre everyone associated with them. It's proof of yet another grim but enduring cosmic truth. He who chooses to live by the sword will eventually die by it as well. Whether any of the Hashashin ended up in the place they most coveted is a question that only we can ask and only they can answer. For a tiny group in a single corner of the world, there's no denying that the Hashashin have carved their name into the flesh of history. But how many of the legends are true?
Would they really throw their lives away on the order of their imam? Were the stories of their speed, stealth, and ferocious devotion to their order real, or fabrications of stupefied enemies? Were the drug-fueled paradise gardens and those iconic white and red outfits a historical reality? Or was it all just a great PR campaign from the Hashashin themselves and the embellishments of future generations? Or maybe it's all real, every single gory, brutal detail.
The shield wall had broken, and Saxon troops were pouring in by the thousand. Their swords and spears were stained red with Viking blood. A lesser man would have fled. But King Harald Hardrada was not a lesser man. Even at 50 years old, covered in scars from a lifetime of battle, he stood unmoved, almost 7 feet tall, a towering pillar of strength, sword in hand and muscles tensed. History calls him the last Viking. He was the most terrifying military mastermind in Europe. But right now, he was losing. The undefeated warlord had deliberately marched 5,000 elite warriors straight into an ambush. 300 Viking longships sailed to England, but only 24 would return. This is how, in a single mud-soaked afternoon, King Harald Hardrada permanently destroyed the Viking Age. A warrior could ask for no more dramatic a start than the Battle of Stiklestad in 1030 AD. King Olaf II of Norway led his forces against the loyalists of King Canute the Great. During the battle, there was a total solar eclipse, bathing the warriors in ominous midday darkness. It felt almost like it was one grand setup for the birth of a warrior god in flesh, and King Olaf needed all the help he could get. He was up against 14,000 men, while his army only numbered 6,000. But one member of that army was the teenage Harald Sigurdsson, who had not yet earned his most famous title. He was King Olaf's little half-brother, but little was the wrong word here. Harald already towered above most of the men and was built like an ox. He had demonstrated such immense strength that he was able to convince King Olaf to let him fight, and they had a good reason to fight too. The Danish Canute had exiled King Olaf and Harald from their ancestral homeland of Norway when he ascended to the throne. Together, they vowed to kill Canute and reinstall their family to greatness. Harald took to fighting like other men took to breathing air. His incredible raw strength allowed him to hack soldiers to death on the battlefield with his Dane axe. He relished feeling their blood splatter onto his young face as he murdered them. But as great a warrior as the young Harald already was, the numerical advantage of Canute's forces were insurmountable. Harald was outnumbered, cornered, and badly injured. His half-brother Olaf was brutally killed by the advancing troops. As the army collapsed around him, and seemingly the dream of retaking Norway with it, Harald had no choice but to flee. It was a terrifying and humiliating experience for a prince brought up in macho, battle-worshipping Viking culture. If it wasn't for the help of his family friend, Runvald Brussison, the future Earl of Orkney, Harald's story would have ended alongside Olaf's. Runvald spirited Harald away under the cover of night to a farmstead in eastern Norway, where allies spent a month nursing him back to health. Throughout this painful period, where Harald could easily have died from his wounds, his thoughts were haunted by an injury that went far deeper than what was done to his flesh.
I let my brother down. I let my nation, my ancestors down. I wasn't strong enough.
When he recovered enough to move, he exiled himself to Sweden, traveling north by the treacherous mountain ranges. He was down, but not out. He'd tasted battle now, and he couldn't get it off his tongue. He would return to Norway someday, and when he did, it would be as one of the greatest warriors that a nation of warriors had ever known. By this time, Harald was beginning to resemble the legacy he'd someday become synonymous with, a vicious Viking whose skill in battle would make Odin himself proud. He'd spent time with his allies in the Kievan Rus region, descended from Vikings themselves and famously brilliant fighters. He was made a general under the Rus forces of Grand Prince Yaroslav, whose daughter Harald would eventually marry. The Grand Prince put him to work helping to lead their campaign against the Poles. Before he even turned 20, Harald had proved himself not just as a superlative warrior, but an excellent leader and tactician. His feats on the battlefields of Poland were the stuff of nightmares. he could slip into the infamous Viking berserker state, where it's almost as though the warrior is possessed by a bloodthirsty demon who could rip through hordes of men like they were nothing. He drove the Polish forces back into their heartlands, slaughtering thousands and earning the commendations of the Grand Prince. Harald was also included in the prince's bloody warfare against Chud people of Estonia and Pecheneg nomads, where he slaughtered countless more. And in true Viking fashion, everywhere he went, he raided and plundered to his heart's content. Seeing what he was capable of made him almost like a god among his troops, a 500-strong warband of elite mercenaries who would follow Harald to the gates of hell. They had sharpened their skills and built their reputation. Now, before they returned to their homelands to get justice for their ancestors, they needed to build their fortune. And in the 11th century, there was no better place to get rich than Constantinople, the seat of the Byzantine Empire, once the eastern side of the now fallen Roman Empire. By the time they arrived at the court of Emperor Michael IV, they were the most terrifying fighting force in all of Europe. You'd have a better chance at surviving if the Grim Reaper himself turned up and allied with your enemies than if Harald and his men arrived. Naturally, the emperor immediately made them part of his Varangian Guard, the elite Norse troops hired to be the most powerful personal fighting forces of the Byzantine emperors, and Harald very quickly earned his extremely pricey retainer. Because of his unnatural lust for violence and conquest, the emperor deployed Harald on every single front the empire was fighting on. In 1035, he spearheaded the Asia Minor campaign, where he was tasked with putting down an Arab pirate uprising. Harald led search and destroy operations in the heart of enemy territory, slaughtering thousands of Arabs and capturing over 80 strongholds in the process. It seemed that wherever the emperor pointed Harald and his troops, an unstoppable trail of death and destruction would follow. Harald would prove this again in 1041, during the Battle of Ostrovo in Bulgaria. Peter Delian, a Bulgarian native sick of his people living under the imperial thumb, led an uprising and declared himself king of Bulgaria. It might have worked out for him if the emperor hadn't dispatched Harald and his army to clean up this little problem. It didn't take long for Harald's forces to utterly crush the rebellion, maim Peter Delian, and kill anyone still loyal to him. It was such a crushing defeat for the Bulgarian people that they would remain under Byzantine control for another 145 years. By 1042, Harald was at the very top of his game. Now in his mid-20s, he had the experience of so many battles under his belt, and he had learned almost everything there was to know about warfare from each one. Not only was he becoming a living legend, he was also becoming one of the richest men in the Northern Hemisphere, both from his payment from the emperor and the obscene amount of loot that he'd plundered. The kingdom of Grand Prince Yaroslav in the Rus became a glorified bank vault for Harald, who was now so rich that he had to send his money and treasure back there for safekeeping. But all was not well in Constantinople. A war of succession was now on for the imperial throne. If one of Michael IV's enemies took it, then Harald and his men would likely become persona non grata to the empire. It would just be a liability to leave a dangerous group who could still be loyal to the former emperor alive. Harald was no fool, and if he was going to take part in a war for the ruling stake in a kingdom, it was going to be his own. He and his men embarked on a journey back to their homeland, knowing that they now had the skills, the resources, and the support to give Norway back to its rightful ruler, himself. After his campaigns in Constantinople and beyond, Harald had married a Rus princess and began amassing a fleet for his next battle. The sons of King Canute had abandoned Norway 10 years earlier to wage campaigns in England, and in their absence, a true Norwegian had taken the throne, Magnus, one of the sons of Harald's half-brother Olaf. He had always liked Magnus, and while it might surprise you due to Harald's warlike nature, he had no intention of trying to fight him for the throne. Instead, he met with Magnus in 1046 and made him a deal that was simply too good to refuse. Harald would give Magnus 1/2 of his incredible fortune in exchange for the chance to rule at his side. Magnus accepted, and for a time, Norway had 2 kings. Harald finally had his crown, his country, and half a kingdom's wealth. The Danes had been purged from the Norwegian royal house, and there was no domestic rebellion that he and his forces couldn't quell. He could have lived a long life, prosperous and comfortable, if he could leave the fighting behind. But of course, that was never going to happen. The Danes were gone, but he still hadn't had his revenge against them. He would spend years trying to mount an ill-fated campaign against Denmark, waging bloody battles and regularly performing classic Viking raids that left many on both sides dead. But ultimately, it was a stalemate that slowly drained Harald's military coffers until popular and financial support for the campaign dried up. Despite his promises to himself, he would never conquer Denmark as Denmark had conquered Norway. However, the next best thing would be to take a territory that the Danes had always prized and was once ruled by one of the sons of King Canute, England. And depending on how he waged this war, it would either secure the Viking legacy for generations to come or put out their fire there and then. In January of 1066, the King of England died without an heir. Edward the Confessor had ruled England as king for 24 years, and his death began a war of succession that would define the nation's future. King Harald Godwinson, a Saxon noble, filled the void immediately, but this was highly contested. Duke William of Normandy was preparing his forces to invade England and take the throne, and then there was a third challenger to the throne. King Harald Hardrada believed he deserved the title of King of England, so in September he set sail with 300 ships and 15,000 men, bolstered by the support and forces of an unlikely ally, Tostig Godwinson, the brother of King Harald and former Earl of Northumbria. The disgraced Earl had been plotting his revenge against his brother ever since his exile following a popular revolt. He believed that in joining his forces with Harald, he had the chance to make his brother and all who allied with him pay for leaving him in the cold. They had the skill, they had the reputation, and they had the largest Viking fighting force ever assembled. Harald may have been in his 50s now, a far cry from his battling prime in the Rus and Byzantine days, but it seemed that he really did have a chance here, and 12 days after their arrival, he could prove just what an excellent chance he had at the Battle of Fulford, which would decide the fate of York. This battle put him and Tostig against the combined forces of the Earls Edwin and Morcar of York, powerful men with considerable armies, though they were vastly outnumbered by Harald's Vikings. It was a perfect mix of tactics and sheer brutality. Harald's master stroke was allowing the York forces to mount their infantry charge directly into the Viking troops. This provided the Vikings with an opening to flank them and break their ranks. The Saxons suffered catastrophic losses, and the two earls surrendered York to Harald and Tostig to avoid further bloodshed. They agreed to give them riches and hostages in the coming days in exchange for peace, so Harald could continue his campaign against the English king. It was just like the good old days for Harald and his men, killing, plundering, winning. With the king's forces so far away, his position seemed unshakable, but for a man whose first ever battle took place under the darkness of an eclipse, it seemed like a twisted kind of poetry that he would fight his last ever battle under the light of a blazing sun. It was an unreasonably hot day in September of 1066, when Harald and his men rose early that morning. His more superstitious pagan ancestors might have taken this as some kind of omen of the horrors to come, but Harald was a more practical man than that. He and Tostig were still bolstered by their recent victories and believed they still had every reason to be confident in their chances to claim the English throne for themselves. The invasion of the Normans under Duke William wasn't expected for weeks, and King Harald was 185 miles away with his army in London. Today, the duo believed, would not be a day for fighting. They would travel to Stamford Bridge along the Derwent River to broker the surrender of the forces from York and exchange hostages to seal the deal. Wanting to conserve his troops for the eventual confrontation with King Harald, he left a huge contingent of his troops with the fleet at Rickall under the command of Eystein Ora, a Norse noble betrothed to Harald's daughter. Harald and Tostig would march to Stamford Bridge with a force of only around 5,000. Since the weather was so hot, he decided it would be the most sensible decision to make the journey without heavy armor and armaments. The force would march with little more than their shields and personal weapons. Something wasn't right. As they got closer, a tall Saxon man with an impressive bearing rode forward across the bridge and approached the Viking forces, meeting directly with Harald and Tostig. The blood seemed to drain from Tostig's face at the sight of him, but Harald, mountain of a man that he was, stood firm. The Saxon stranger spoke calmly, despite the gathering fog of imminent battle.
Tostig, it isn't too late, the stranger said. If you give up now, all will be forgiven. Your trespasses against the crown will be forgotten, and your earldom will be restored.
Tostig's nervous eyes turned to the Viking warlord standing next to him, whose rough hand was gripped around the hilt of his sword. Tostig asked,
And what would King Harald receive for accepting such terms?
The rider looked at Harald with a look of disdain, the way you might look at a rat in your pantry. Without hesitation, he replied,
The Norseman will receive 7 feet of ground, or as much more as he needs, as he is taller than most men.
This made Harald laugh with surprise and genuine respect. Given that the Vikings were all about strength, courage, and bravado on the battlefield, the sheer guts that this envoy of the Saxons was something he admired. Still, they rejected the rider's deal, and he rode back across the bridge without another word. Tostig was still quiet and pale, like he'd seen a ghost.
Who was that brave fool?
Harald asked Tostig. Tostig gulped and replied,
That was my brother, King Harald.
For a moment, Harald felt something he hadn't since his retreat from the battlefield at Stiklestad when he was still just a 15-year-old boy. It was a twinge of nervousness. That brief encounter had shown him that he wasn't facing an empty suit of armor here. One of the main weapons in his arsenal had always been striking fear into the hearts of his opponents, but now, in King Harald, he saw a man without fear. If it came to blows, could Harald and his men still win this with pure skill alone? Without warning, 15,000 Saxon troops emerged in a terrifying battle frenzy on the other side of the bridge. Harald's eyes widened. King Harald and his men were almost 200 miles away. How could they have possibly made a journey like that in 4 days? But they had. Perhaps Harald in his younger years would have been wilier, less arrogant. Maybe he would have sent forth scouts to check for an ambush. This time, King Harald had defied the odds, and now they were going to show these Viking invaders exactly what they could do. Harald's forces had been split twice already, once between here and Rickall, and again across the bridge itself. The bulk of the army on the east side of the Derwent River, opposite the Saxon forces, and a small contingent trapped to the west, sitting ducked to the advancing mass of Saxons, ready to stain their spears and swords with blood. But even here, outmanned and outgunned, the Vikings had one asset on their side: sheer bloodlust. While Harald and Tostig marshaled their troops to form an impromptu shield wall against the Saxon advance, one man stepped forward, a man whose name is lost to history, but whose deed in the Battle of Stamford Bridge is still remembered almost 1,000 years after it happened. A huge man, a head larger than Harald, in a heavy mail shirt with a mighty Danax that had taken hundreds of lives. A true berserker. As the first wave of Saxon troops stormed the bridge, he let out an animalistic roar of pure rage and entered the berserker state. The swing of his axe seemed to simply ignore the armor that his opponents were wearing, cleaving through, cracking leather, splitting mail, rending flesh, and snapping bones. Soon the air was thick with screams, and a tide of blood washed off the sides of the bridge into the Derwent, as the nameless berserker hacked off limbs and crushed heads through iron helmets like eggshells. The Saxons were taken aback by the sheer ferocity of this one soldier who, in his manic blood rage, was said to have single-handedly killed 40 Saxon troops. During all this, Harald was able to successfully form a shield wall on the other side of the bridge, giving their men at least some kind of fighting chance. One of the faster men was also sent on a mad dash back to Rickall to muster up reinforcements that could help them turn the tide. Even with reinforcements, they'd still be outnumbered by King Harald's troops. But as the berserker on the bridge was proving, in melee warfare, it was often less about the amount of men in the fight, and more about the amount of fight in the men. The fear that he struck into the Saxon troops allowed the surviving Viking forces trapped on the west side of the bridge to run past and join back up with the larger group. Now, they had a fighting chance. In the true hierarchy of battle, though, strength almost always comes close second to cunning. King Harald soon realized that the bridge was giving the berserker a tactical advantage. Like the 300 Spartans of Thermopylae, the bridge formed a choke point that forced the Saxons to take on the berserker in smaller groups, where his raw power gave him the advantage. If he kept sending troops that way, he was effectively forcing them into a meat grinder. While the berserker was blinded by fury and the Norsemen were trying to solidify their ranks, King Harald attempted to turn the tide. One of his men climbed into a barrel in the Derwent and floated on the river, carrying a long spear. When he was underneath the bridge, he thrusted the spear up, piercing through the bridge and under the berserker's chainmail. His intestines spilled out onto the bridge as Saxon soldiers set upon him, hacking him to pieces as the forces advanced towards the Viking shield wall. The ultimate clash had already begun. King Harald didn't fear the Viking shield wall, showing the same courage he did when he faced Harald and Tostig alone.
The Saxon army charged across the bridge and locked their shields with the Vikings. Two forces of thousands were physically pushing up against each other. It was inevitable that the shield wall couldn't last for long. And it didn't. After a struggle that asked everything of both sides, the shield wall broke, and the two armies spilled into each other in a state of all-out bloody war. The Saxons seemed endless in their teeming thousands, pouring through the gaps in the shield wall to outflank the Vikings, with the reinforcements from Rickall still potentially hours away. Spears and swords and axes and arrows pierced flesh. Dark blood seeped into the mud as thousands of leather boots churned it, and in amongst it all stood Harald, panting, watching his ambitions of conquering the British Isles collapsing in bloody heaps all around him. He drew in a lungful of air and bellowed,
Cut them down! Cut them all down! Down to the last bloody man!
He drew the sword from his baldric and let loose a mighty roar, hundreds of years of Viking lineage flowing through him, his body a conduit for the bloodlust of his ancestors. He entered the berserker trance, his eyes glazing over and his bloodied fists tightening around the hilt of his ancestral blade. These Saxons around him, they weren't soldiers, they were meat, and Harald was the butcher. He started swinging, and with every swing his sword tasted flesh and blood. He slashed throats and cut off heads, gliding from troop to troop, barely even conscious of himself as his sword split collarbones and pierced through armor, cracking ribs and destroying hearts. To the Saxons, this wasn't a man. This was a demon that had crawled up from the bowels of hell to wage war against God himself. The Saxons tried to surround him as the other Vikings fell, but that was just providing Harald with more sport, more meat to carve. Amongst the Saxon forces, an archer was knocking an arrow against his bow and aiming for Harald. His martial skill may have made up for his lack of armor up close, but at a distance, it was a fatal flaw. The archer let the arrow loose, and it flew straight and true into Harald's throat, cutting veins and piercing his trachea. The sudden flash of pain jogged the Viking ruler from his berserker rage and forced his soul back into his body for just long enough to be a conscious witness to it leaving. Blood spurted from his wounded throat, and Harald's strength failed him, causing him to collapse down towards the mud. He died looking up to the sky and watching the world go dark. He never screamed, not once. Tostig still remained and refused to surrender, but he wasn't half the warrior that Harald was and was killed by the Saxon forces. Even when the reinforcements, led by Eystein Ora, arrived hours after the slaying of their king, it did no good. Eystein fell on the same battlefield as Harald and Tostig, and the dreams of the Viking conquest of England died that very afternoon, where the scant few survivors fled. The Scots and English rebels that supported Harald's claim scattered across the lands, and the Norsemen escaped back to their homeland by sea. 300 ships had transported the invasion force over. The survivors were so few that it only took 24 ships to transport them back. It was a 92% casualty rate. The Vikings were no more. But Harald's story wasn't over. Harald Hardrada may have been dead, but his final stand still changed the course of history. Just 3 weeks after his death, in the English village of Hastings, the troops of King Harald Godwinson stood against the forces of the challenger, William the Bastard, the Duke of Normandy, in a battle that would decide the fate of England forever. It's very likely history would have played out very differently if King Harald hadn't driven his troops to exhaustion with their epic 4-day march to the Battle of Stamford Bridge, where some of the king's greatest warriors had fallen to the Norse swords and Danaxes, and even many of the survivors were injured and exhausted. William used tactics that would have made Harald beam with pride. He made his Breton forces feign retreat so that the English broke ranks to pursue them. Then the Norman cavalry flanked the chasing forces and slaughtered their troops en masse. The Normans meticulously dismantled the English shield wall, leading to a bloody pitched battle between the two forces while William's archers rained arrows. One of those arrows, at least according to some sources such as the famous Norman Bayeux Tapestry, pierced King Harald through the eye, leading to his being butchered on the battlefield. After his victory, William the Bastard was crowned King of England by Christmas and entered the pages of history as William the Conqueror forevermore. While the Battle of Stamford Bridge and the death of Harald Hardrada is seen by many as the destruction of the Vikings as a whole, things are actually a little more complicated. Other Nordic kings would stage campaigns against the British Isles in the centuries that followed, and then there's King William himself. Normandy, the part of France from which he hailed, means the land of the Northmen, since the area around the Seine River was colonized by Vikings in the 9th century. In all likelihood, the Viking blood that powered Harold's conquest coursed through the veins of William the Conqueror too. And perhaps that's how the Vikings truly lived on.
Does this boy have a death wish?
That's the only thought in Arima Kihei's mind as his hand tightens around his sword. Across from him stands a boy, just 13 years old. Big, sure, but still a child. And yet he's challenging a seasoned samurai. Kihei is a storied warrior, well versed in the Shinto Ryu school, an expert in dealing death on the battlefield with a spear or a sword. Earlier, he'd entered a fenced-off clearing near Hirafuku village and put up a notice in town, inviting any worthy warrior to come and engage him in a shiai, a competitive duel. Then this boy, barely in his teen years, kicks open the fence, wielding nothing more than a wooden staff.
Are you Kihei? Well, let's duel!
Kihei grits his teeth. He'll cut this insolent child down, like he's done so many times before. What kind of fool brings a staff to a sword fight? He reacts instantly, unleashing one of his favorite strikes, fast, precise, and meant to end the fight in a single blow. It's the kind of attack that has finished countless opponents before, but this time, it misses. Not by much. The blade slices through the air just fractions of an inch from the boy's body. That should have been enough to end it, enough to scare him off. But instead of retreating, the boy keeps moving forward. At first, Kihei assumes it's desperation. Then he realizes the boy is closing the distance on purpose, stepping in tighter and tighter. Kihei no longer has the space to swing his sword properly. The advantage he's relied on vanishes in an instant. Before he can adjust, the boy lunges in, wraps his arms around Kihei, and locks him into a bear hug. Before Kihei can reach for his tanto blade and execute a close-quarters attack, the boy goes low. He forces his shoulder hard into Kihei's gut, wrenching the samurai off the ground and throwing him to the earth, head first. Kihei tries to get back up, but the world's spinning. Through his foggy vision, he can just about make out the boy picking up his staff and stepping closer. There's a deafening crack, then searing pain explodes across his forehead. And the boy doesn't stop. He strikes the prone Kihei in the head with his staff again and again, cracking skull, covering his robes in flecks of red and the spatter of tiny pink chunks. Kihei's skull gives under the force of the boy's last blow, exposing glistening brains to the uncaring sun. The samurai vomits a geyser of blood and dies as the boy cleans off his staff and, with no ceremony, leaves. This is the first duel of Miyamoto Musashi, the greatest and most brutal samurai duelist in all of history, or as he's known in Japan, Kensei, the Sword Saint. Some people are born in the wrong generation, but Miyamoto Musashi, born Shinmen Musashi no Kami Fujiwara no Genshin, was not one of them. When he was born in 1584, the warlord Oda Nobunaga had begun the brutal task of unifying the country after centuries of conflict, only to be assassinated 2 years later. It was the dog days of the Sengoku period, a chaotic and violent time. The perfect forge for creating a chaotic and violent man. Battle was in Musashi's blood. He'd been born to a noble family in the rural village of Miyamoto, with ancestors in an offshoot of the famous Akamatsu clan of the Harima province. His grandfather was a samurai, and his father Munasai was a samurai, all who'd worked in service of great and powerful men and their causes. And that, by birthright, made Musashi a samurai too, a revered class, and the only ones in Japan permitted to carry 2 swords on their belt, one long and one short. In an earlier era, Musashi's background might have afforded him a charmed life, but during the bleak years of the Hideyoshi campaigns, he was left a young samurai without a master, a ronin. His mother had passed away, and his father had abandoned him when he was only 8, leaving him in the care of his uncle, a priest. We'll never know why the lust for combat ran so fiercely in young Musashi's blood, whether it was something he was born with, or a force that entered him like the spirit of a vengeful Oni. But what we do know is that when Musashi began his quest to be the greatest duelist in history, he never stopped. Brutalizing Kihei is just a warm-up for young Musashi. Soon after his first kill, he begins his warrior pilgrimage, a tradition for ronin. He travels the Japanese countryside, seeking knowledge of new techniques and worthy opponents to defeat. Musashi would later write that to be a samurai is to master the art of death, to live every moment prepared to die, and to achieve complete focus in battle. Word has started to spread of the young ronin who cuts down anyone in his path, despite now being only 16 years old. Akiyama, a samurai of the Tajima province, sees young Musashi as little more than another potential notch on his belt. A samurai's honor is his pride and joy, and that honor can be counted in duels won. And this is more than just pride for its own sake. An honorable samurai with a reputation for victory is more likely to be noticed and hired as a retainer by a powerful lord, guaranteeing wealth and security. He approaches Musashi in Tajima during his wanderings and challenges him to a duel. This should be over quickly, he thinks as he draws his long sword. They both stand still for a tense moment. Neither wants to be baited into making the first move. He who attacks first, if he fails to kill his opponent immediately, almost always pays the price. But despite Akiyama's reputation as a capable strategist, his pride nags at him. He can't be seen as intimidated by some whelp who could barely fill his father's boots. Akiyama charges in with a savage war cry and swings his longsword, but Musashi's bold fighting style throws him off. He ducks away from the blade and moves in closer, eliminating whatever range advantage Akiyama's weapon could have given him. With one stroke of his sword, Musashi opens the rival samurai's belly, spilling his guts. As Akiyama falls to his knees, already dying, Musashi keeps walking. His second win, his second kill. But it is a fight so insignificant to him that it will later occupy only one line in his book on the art of the samurai, writing simply that, "When I was 16, I struck down an able strategist, Tadashima Akiyama. Far greater battles are still to come." Musashi would go on to develop a style that would define his life and swordsmanship career. Niten Ichi Ryu, the school of the strategy of two heavens as one. The key belief of this style, which Musashi invented himself, is that a samurai must always be holding both his long and short sword in battle. Not only will this allow you to face multiple opponents at once, it will also allow you to engage opponents at any distance. During the start of a fight, or if your enemy tries to escape, you can strike at them with the longsword. If the enemy slips past your guard and gets close, you have your short sword ready to defend and strike back. This technique would serve him well in his next challenge, when he took part in one of the most brutal battles Japan had ever known. The Tokugawa shogunate began rising to power, and the Edo period truly began in the year 1600. It's generally believed that Musashi, at 17 years old, fought in the Battle of Sekigahara under the banners of the losing side. If Musashi wasn't made of iron before this battle, this was the incident that forged him into tempered steel. It's one day of pure hell on the Sekigahara battlefield. 30,000 men will die as Musashi fights to stay alive. He and his allies were vastly outnumbered by a superior force here. Musashi, perhaps for the first time in his life, was forced to fall back into retreat and spend days on the run. After the vanquishing of the Western Army, Ieyasu's forces, the victors, decided that they didn't want to leave any survivors who could fight back against their new regime. They sent out detachments of soldiers and empowered vicious bounty hunters to hunt down anyone who'd been loyal to Ashikaga on the battlefield that day and put them to the sword. Luckily for Musashi, he laid low enough that he could avoid anyone hunting for him. Musashi chose to live more like a beast than a man. He often remained away from society, traveling the wilderness in blistering heat and bitter cold, practicing kendo, the way of the sword, almost constantly. He pushed away all human connections. He never bathed or changed his clothes, knowing that in those times he would be vulnerable to attack. Musashi was a man who lived to kill, and was ready to die at any moment. It wasn't just Musashi's skills that terrified his opponents, though. To them, he even looked like a demon. Musashi was said to have suffered from eczema, giving his skin a red and blotchy appearance. He never once cut his hair, giving him the tangled mane of a wild man. It must have seemed almost like some evil spirit or vengeful zombie was lunging at you with two blades, ready to take your life. In 1604, Musashi, now 21 years old, rolls into Kyoto, then the capital of the nation. His avant-garde dueling antics have already made a name for him here as a deadly ronin on the rise. Members of the proud Yoshioka warrior clan, once the personal swordsmanship instructors to the shogun, want to put this mad dog down. Years, perhaps even decades earlier, Musashi's father had faced 3 Yoshioka swordsmen in duels, defeating 2 of them with skill and precision. Now he wants to see if he can beat his old man's record. His quest brings him first to the swampy depths of Rendai Moor, just outside the city, where he faces Yoshioka Seijiro. Seijiro is the proud head of the family, unsheathing his deadly ancestral sword. His retainers, also armed, standing behind him. Rain pours down from the sky, soaking the master's robes and hair, though his samurai topknot remains immaculate. Musashi is doing something strange, though. He's not using his iconic 2-sword style. In fact, he's not carrying a real sword at all. Instead, he's armed with only a wooden training sword. He doesn't want to just defeat the Yoshioka. He wants to humiliate them, to destroy their pride, to wound their honor.
What's the matter, Seijiro?
He asks, voice plain and even.
Not afraid, are you?
That does it. Seijiro rushes in. The family head swings for him, but finds nothing but air. Musashi responds by striking Seijiro hard on the shoulder with his wooden sword. Seijiro stumbles, and Musashi takes advantage, striking him and knocking him to his knees. With decades of generational wrath behind every swing, Musashi beats Seijiro senseless on the ground, bruising flesh, cracking bone. It isn't long before the proud lord is begging for mercy, and in the ultimate insult, Musashi grants it. He knows that letting this man live with the humiliation of this memory is a far crueler fate than giving him a warrior's death in combat. Seijiro's retainers load his broken body onto a makeshift stretcher and carry him back to his mansion, where he'll cut off his samurai topknot in shame. But this humiliation will harden Seijiro's students' resolve to battle and kill the upstart who had stolen their master's dignity. The first is Yoshioka Denshichiro, an impressive swordsman taught in the ways of kendo by Seijiro. He demands a duel with Musashi outside the city and won't take no for an answer. Musashi is more than happy to oblige him. They make an agreement. The 2 of them will cross swords outside the city yet again for the honor of the Yoshioka family. A good, clean, fair fight. At least that's what Denshichiro is hoping for. Musashi spends the morning relaxing while Denshichiro prepares for the duel. Denshichiro arrives punctually, but when the time for the duel begins, Musashi isn't there. It's half infuriating, half vindicating. Of course Musashi was a coward all along, he thinks. Of course he'd be content to attack a man far older than him, but would shrink away in fear when having to face a warrior his own size. Of course, he'd never have the guts or the honor to face a duelist of Denshichiro's caliber. The samurai exhales and lets his guard down. And then Musashi arrives. He doesn't give Denshichiro a moment to recalibrate, doesn't exchange a word, and before Denshichiro could remark on the insult of Musashi once again bringing that same wooden sword as before, it's already over. The wood connects with Denshichiro's forehead with an almighty crunch, and blood begins to leak from the samurai's eyes. He collapses to the ground, dead from a single strike. Musashi leaves as casually as he arrived, having added to the tally of Yoshioka humiliation. Clearly, the Yoshiokas realized this Musashi wasn't above dirty tricks. If he was going to pull the wool over their eyes like this, perhaps the best way would be to end his wretched life with a similar deception. They would have Yoshioka Madashichiro, who was little more than a boy in the middle of his training, challenge Musashi to a fight in the pines near the Ichijoji Buddhist temple. The boy would arrive with a gang of Yoshioka retainers, and when Musashi arrived, they would, together, cut him down. Musashi accepts the challenge, and it seems the trap has been laid perfectly. The gang arrives in the pines, hands close to the hilts of their swords, Madashichiro looking comical in his ill-fitting war attire. The second Musashi arrives, all swords will be drawn, and the fool will die a well-earned death. But, to none of their surprise, he doesn't show. The pines are still. Musashi must have sniffed out the plot somehow and decided to leave Kyoto for his own good before he was cut down. Still, they stick around, knowing the trick he pulled to murder Denshichiro. A wise choice on their part, or so it seemed. Musashi wasn't planning on arriving late. He was already there, lurking, watching their every move. waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, that moment has come. Musashi lunges in, exploiting a gap in the retainer's formation. Before Yoshioka Madashichiro can even turn his head, Musashi's hand is already on the hilt of his short sword. He draws the blade and decapitates the boy in a single, fluid motion, showering himself and the surrounding retainers in a rain of blood. As the retainers draw their swords in shock and horror, Musashi grips and draws his longsword, adopting his signature style. Those who dare approach would need to brave the wild swings of his longsword, keeping a circle of distance around him. A few of those foolhardy enough to get closer saw their flesh cleaved by the tempered steel of his short sword. With the same ease with which he entered the fray, Musashi cut himself a path through the would-be assassins and fled into the pines. Never had the Yoshioka family's humiliation been so great, but Musashi had indeed beaten his own father's record. He had no need to remain in Kyoto any longer, and now he was ready to once again embark on his warrior pilgrimage, searching for ways to improve his craft and match up against more worthy opponents. Sometimes he slashes open their throats or bellies with his steel. Other times, he beats them to death with sticks or staffs or wooden swords. Of the around 60 duels that Musashi fights before he's 29 years of age, we know the names of only a handful. But despite his love of dirty tricks, psychological warfare, and unconventional dueling tactics, Musashi didn't have contempt for all the men he dueled. Some, in fact, he wanted to learn from. Okuzoin Doe was a priest at the Kofuku-ji, and he wasn't some defenseless holy man. Doe was a master in Hozoin Ryu, a traditional type of Japanese spear fighting. Musashi faces off against this man with a wooden short sword, no intent to kill him this time, and successfully parries the priest's spear thrusts before beating him into submission. In a rare change for him, though, Musashi remains at the temple and befriends Doe and the other priests, whom he enjoys talking with when he's resting. During his period at the temple, Musashi is extremely inquisitive, constantly asking questions about the spear fighting techniques and observing the priests during drills. Everywhere Musashi went, he tried to learn something, and depending on how you treated him, he could learn from you or school you. Musashi encountered a man named Shishido in 1607 who was an expert with the kusarigama, translated literally into chain sickle, a frightening scythe with a swinging chain and weight hanging from the end. Musashi was enough of a name now that warriors like this felt they had something to gain from killing him, so Shishido approached him with a gang of retainers and prepared for battle. Naturally, Shishido makes a show of it, flinging and whipping around his chain to show skill and dexterity, but Musashi doesn't feel like messing around today. Before the fight can even truly begin, he whips a dagger out of his robes and launches it at Shishido, piercing him through the heart in front of his confused and terrified retainers. But even though Musashi seems invincible, they're honor-bound to avenge their master's death. The retainers fan out around Musashi and attempt to box him in, but they're no match for his two-sword style. He doesn't even need to kill any of them. When faced with his skills, there's no other option than to retreat and leave their master's corpse laying in the street. Muso Gunosuke got a little luckier. He encountered Musashi while the master samurai was cutting wood, hoping to make himself a new bow. Gunosuke drew his sword on Musashi and challenged him to a fight, but in true Musashi style, he didn't use the axe that he was cutting wood with. Instead, he picked up a stick. When Gunosuke attacked, all fury and steel, Musashi avoided his blows and struck him on the head with the stick, scaring him away. Some say there would later be a rematch between the two that ended in a draw, but it's hard to tell the legend from the fact there. With so many foes so easily slain, Musashi was in search of a challenge. That's why he approached Lord Matsudaira, the head of a powerful samurai clan, and requested the opportunity to fight the strongest man in his employ. Matsudaira, morbidly curious after hearing Musashi's reputation, granted this wish, so long as the terms of the duel were non-lethal. The man he provided was a towering figure who fought with an 8-foot, 2.4-meter long wooden hexagonal staff. Musashi, of course, would fight with 2 wooden swords. The duel was held in Lord Matsudaira's library garden, and Musashi quickly took the advantage. Boxing the warrior in with an aggressive fighting style, he fought him up to the garden steps until the man fell on his back, and struck at him until he had gained submission. The fight was so impressive that Lord Matsudaira requested to fight Musashi himself under the same terms, and was quickly laid out against the stone steps in the same fashion. but the lord wouldn't give up so easily. He raised his sword and tried to keep up his noble attitude, but Musashi simply said the words, "Fire and stones cut," and with a single strike, smashed the lord's sword in half. Lord Matsudaira, having gained a personal respect for Musashi, paid him to remain at the mansion for a time and act as a swordsmanship teacher to him. Musashi accepted the request. He'd earned some time away from wandering. But the battle he's most famous for was still to come. If it could be said that anyone in the life of Miyamoto Musashi was his nemesis, the honor would have to go to another young samurai named Sasaki Kojiro. He was a revered swordsman who invented his own signature move, known as the swallow counter, which he'd created after observing the movement of a swallow's tail. Kojiro was so promising a warrior that he was made the retainer of a powerful lord named Hosokawa Tadaoki. For the first time in a long time, Kojiro did not seek permission to duel Musashi. Musashi sought permission to duel Kojiro. This permission was granted, and the terms of the duel were set. They would face off against one another at 8 a.m. on a small island near Ogura, and this was no easy matter. Musashi himself would later say that Kojiro was one of, if not the greatest opponent he ever faced, though nobody but Musashi himself could ever have predicted how that fight would ultimately go down. It's a rare thing for two men so equal in reputation to face off like this. Rumors immediately began circulating that perhaps Musashi would back out. Maybe his brutish tactics would fail against the more subtle and sophisticated techniques of Kojiro. The fact that, when the duel time came, Musashi was nowhere to be seen only served to reinforce this belief. An envoy of the officials waiting with Kojiro on the island was sent to the home of another samurai where Musashi was waiting and found him still in bed, asleep. They jostled him awake and gave him a jug of water to wash himself, which he instead drank, and made a beeline to the shore where a boat was waiting to ferry him to the island. The boatman couldn't help but notice that Musashi seemed incredibly calm, perhaps even still sleepy, his messy hair wrapped in a towel and his kimono sleeves tied up with paper string. Rather than stilling himself or dictating what could very well have been his last recorded words, he decided instead to do some woodworking. The boatman probably thought that Musashi had lost his mind when, despite having two swords tied at his belt, he seemed to be carving one of the spare oars on the boat into a makeshift wooden sword. That kind of thing might have worked against some petty bandit or novice, but not a warrior of Kojiro's standing. Kojiro, who had never met Musashi before this encounter, stood waiting on the island. He was as shocked as anyone when the boat docked and he saw his opponent climbing out of it, looking like some mad wild man, wielding nothing but a sharpened oar. Kojiro would make this quick and end the life of this legendary samurai who had clearly gone past his prime. He drew his sword and discarded his scabbard as Musashi ran in. The oar-wielding samurai said of the scabbard,
"You'll have no more need of that."
As he charged, Kojiro felt insulted. For all the talk of Musashi wanting this fight, the deranged duelist still wasn't taking this seriously. He would strike first and end Musashi with a single stroke of his blade. But of course, that was exactly what Musashi wanted. When Kojiro swung, Musashi pitched the oar upwards, knocking the subtle samurai's blade off course. Now, with the sharpened oar far above Kojiro's head, in the split second that followed, Musashi swung the weapon down with tremendous force and split open Kojiro's skull at the forehead. He fell to the ground immediately, felled by a single strike. The nobles officiating the duel could only stand back in stunned silence as Musashi turned, bowed to them, and returned to the boat. He was never defeated, not once, in every single duel he ever fought. Of course, his appetite for learning and excitement didn't end with duels. He returned to being a soldier again multiple times, besieging Osaka Castle with the Tokugawa forces. He took an adopted son, Iori, who would himself become a great warrior. After a brutal life as a wandering ronin, in his latter years, the many lords of Japan began taking an interest in Musashi. He was invited to stay as a guest of Hosokawa Tadatoshi in Kumamoto Castle, an offer that Musashi took up, perhaps tiring of the constant movement his path had taken him on. He continued teaching his unique fighting style to students, while also focusing on his other passion, painting, which he sometimes did under his pen name Niten. He also took on metallurgy as a hobby, and in addition to his number of worshipful students growing into the thousands, he even made a company that created sword guards. A key part of Miyamoto Musashi's philosophy as a warrior is that one must learn the way of every profession if you are ever to truly understand your own. As a warrior, he was a terrifying demon, whether he was slicing you in half with a steel sword or crushing your skull with a wooden one. But in terms of curiosity and his thirst for knowledge, he was more like an inquisitive child, even well into his 50s and 60s. It wasn't until his time in the isolated cave, where he chose to note down a life's worth of battle wisdom into his enduring classic, The Book of Five Rings, that he finally found an opponent he couldn't defeat: cancer. He would pass away peacefully on June 13, 1645, but in death, he truly became the Sword Saint, and neither that nor the centuries that have unfolded since could even hope to dull Musashi's legacy as the greatest samurai who ever lived, learned, and killed in Japan.